True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you. Police emergency. What's your location?
Good morning, Brookfield.
Whereabouts in Brookfield, sir?
593 Brookfield Road, Brookfield.
And what's happening there?
I don't want to be alarmist. I tried the 131 number, but just went on forever.
Yep.
But my wife isn't home. I don't know where she is.
Okay. When did you last see her, sir?
Last night when we went to bed. When I went to bed, and I got up this morning and she wasn't there, and that's not unusual. She often goes for a walk in the morning.
Yep.
I've texted her and called her a number of times. I think she has her phone with her.
Yep.
And
what time does she normally get back when she goes for a walk?
This morning she was planning to. She has a seminar in the city, so she was planning to leave by around 7.
Okay.
And she's not back home yet.
Okay, all right. And what's your wife?
I'm now driving the streets. My father's come over and to look after my children.
Yeah, okay. So what's your name, first of all?
I'm sorry. Gerard, Gerard.
And your last name, Gerard?
Baden-Clay, Baden.
Yep.
-Clay.
And what's your wife's name?
Allison with 2 L's.
And same surname? Okay, and how old is Allison?
44.
Okay, so you didn't see her before she got up this morning, so...
No.
Okay, all right. And what's her mobile number?
0401.
Yep.
149.
Yep.
013.
013, okay. All right, and how tall is your wife?
About 5'6", something like that, I think.
Okay, and what colour hair has she got?
It's sort of a blondie, brownie, reddish sort of look.
Yep, and how long is it?
Shoulder length.
Shoulder length? Okay. What I'll do, I'm going to put a broadcast on for the police to keep a lookout for your wife. Are you going to go back home? Because we'll get police to come and see you.
I need to go home and
get
the kids ready for school.
Yeah. All right, Gerard. I'll get police to come and see you, okay? What's the best contact number for you?
0400.
Yep.
456.
Yep. Okay, just give us a call back if she hasn't returned before police get there, okay? All right. Thanks, Gerard. Bye-bye.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick. Please enjoy this ad-free episode. There will be a link in our show notes for anyone who wants to make a contribution to the Allison Baden-Clay Foundation. The work of the foundation funds the education and awareness of domestic and family violence throughout Queensland. A worthy foundation.
Absolutely. In Australia, about 1 person goes missing every 15 minutes. The majority are found within a week. Most missing persons cases take hours, days, or even weeks before an in-depth investigation is really put into action. But in the case of 43-year-old mother of 3, Allison Baden-Clay, it took just minutes. Constables arrived at the Baden-Clay home at 8 a.m., took one look at Allison's husband, Gerard, and strongly suspected foul play. He was dressed for a normal day at the office when he walked out the front door of his suburban home and greeted the officers. Right away, they noticed the fresh gouges running down the right side of Gerard's face. Jagged and raw, they inflamed his whole cheek and trailed off at the edge of his jaw. Those scratches told a story that didn't match the story that Gerard told them. He said he had cut himself shaving. They looked at this supposed concerned husband and this long-standing pillar of the community, and they saw a killer. In the days after Allison's disappearance, investigators learned that her marriage was not what it appeared to be. Gerard had been unfaithful, and his mistress was expecting him to ask Allison for a divorce. It could have been a case of a suburban mom who just needed some time alone. Maybe she'd come walking up the driveway any minute. Or maybe they would find her injured on a walking path, just waiting for help. But they really didn't think so. A former Miss Queensland beauty queen, Allison Baden-Clay, seemed to be living a charmed life. Her husband was a successful and well-known real estate agent. Their 3 young daughters were healthy and cute. Their home was in Brookfield, a very desirable suburb. So, what led to Allison's body being found in a secluded creek? Like thousands of women who suffer from domestic violence, Allison lived with underlying misery as she worked to present herself and her family in the best possible light. In our Quiet End talk today, we're looking into the development and destruction of Allison and Gerard's relationship. What went wrong, and did the punishment end up fitting the crime? And Dick has a special beer for us today.
I have an Australian beer, obviously, that was gifted to us by some very nice people in Australia, Lisa and David. We met them for the first time at the CrimeCon conference.
We did. What a delightful couple.
And they muled a 6-pack of beer for me, all the way from Australia.
Yeah,
Very
was
impressive.
that legal?
Oh, I don't know.
It was pretty cool. I was impressed.
So the only problem, though, was I couldn't find a beer that was brewed in Queensland. So I got the next door state. I think it's Victoria. Anyway, the beer is called Small Ale, brewed by Colonial Brewing Company in Margaret River, Australia. It's a nice session beer, a very easy to drink, low alcohol beer. Its ABV is only 3.5%. So you could toss back a few of these on a nice hot summer day.
Oh, that's basically like water to you.
It is water, pretty much.
But a nice flavor.
This is a great beer. It's an American Pale Ale. The first thing I noticed that was really cool to me is that when you pull the pop top, the whole top lid comes off.
Like it did back in the U.S. in the 70s.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was really neat. So the beer is a hazy amber color. It's got a small white head, a little bit of lacing, sweet malt aroma, some floral and citrus hops, and the taste follows the aroma quite nicely. You get some caramel, followed by the floral hops with a little bit of grapefruit thrown in at the end.
So this sounds like a really refreshing drink to have when you're working in the garden or just hanging out on the deck.
This is one of those beers you could call a lawnmower beer. After you've mowed the lawn, you sit back and have a few of these because they're crisp and they're cool and they're refreshing.
Excellent. Let's open it up.
Okay.
Here we are at the Quiet End, and it's open mic night, and I thought that I spotted a celebrity, but maybe it's just a lookalike. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Well, I thought I did, although it looked like Wayne Newton.
Yes.
But it looked like Wayne Newton who'd undergone some radical plastic surgery.
Yeah, but he has. I mean, haven't you been keeping up with The Bachelorette?
Yeah, I don't think they recognized him either.
Scary. I mean, I am not opposed to a little work. I think it's actually okay. More with women than men, which might be a sexist thing to say, but...
Might be.
He looks like he's got these little round eyes just and like a mask around him.
Well, and he's 76 years old.
Which I kind of feel like that makes him look older.
So,
I'd rather prefer just a naturally aging guy. I think looks better.
Well, you look at that face and holy cow.
Scary.
It is.
So if that's really him, I'm still pretty impressed because he's accomplished a lot. He's Mr. Las Vegas. He's a big star.
Big star there.
Yeah.
Worth millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, so I don't want to totally disrespect him, but I do want to go over at some point and see if it's really him.
Maybe we'll let you sing with him.
Yeah, what is one of his famous songs? He's got a few, or I don't really know much about
I
him.
think the biggest is Dankeschön, right?
Right. From Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
And his other one, I think to me it's maybe even a bigger hit, is Red Roses for a Blue Lady. Remember that one?
Oh, that sounds familiar. I thought that was Bobby Vinton. My mom used to listen to Bobby Vinton.
Wayne Newton. And he's done a bunch of Christmas Carol type things. You know, like Frosty the Snowman and Jingle Bells and stuff like that.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I mix him up sometimes with Tom Jones, because didn't he do It's Not Unusual? Was that Tom Jones or Wayne Newton?
That was Tom Jones.
Okay. See, I mixed them up.
What's New Pussycat?
That's Tom Jones.
We're jumping into a whole different
All right,
thing.
well.
But Wayne...
Anybody under 40 here has fallen asleep on us, so maybe we should stop.
We probably should.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so let's start talking about Allison. Now, Allison, she grew up in a regular working-class family, kind of an average blue-collar neighborhood. Her dad, Jeff, was a fireman, and he also painted houses on his days off. Her mom, Priscilla, was a librarian at Allison's school. They lived in a small house in Red Bank, a suburb of Ipswich. Over the years, Allison's family had worked in local brick, wool, and railway workshops. Priscilla had grown up in a house just a few doors down from where she was raising her own kids. Priscilla was the daughter of Bill and Lily Dan. Bill had been a railwayman and a Labor Party member. Bill and Lily had had 10 children. So as you can imagine, money was tight, and Lily really became skilled at stretching the family dollar. A family story goes that Lily had just 2 cloth nappies for each baby, so when one nappy, a diaper, was dirty, she'd wash it, hang it on the line, and put on the other one. So you just had to keep switching these 2.
That sounds like it's a very difficult job.
It's a tough life, huh?
Maybe you could have 3 nappies or something.
Well, that would be splurging.
I guess
money was tight.
The two nappy system worked because she had 10 kids and that was it.
Well, she had to be at home working this stuff all day, right? This was an organized system she had to maintain.
Must have been.
God love her, yeah. Bill built his house himself with just the help of a neighbor. And at first the home had just 2 bedrooms and 4 kids shared 1 double bunk bed. The Dans were Methodists and their children went to Sunday school. Priscilla's father and brothers were big soccer fans, and they would train in the evenings on a strip of grass behind the railway workshops. Allison's dad, Jeff Dickey, was also from Red Bank. His parents, James and Elizabeth Dickey, lived there all their lives. Jeff had just 1 sibling, a sister named Julie. He and Priscilla knew each other for most of their lives. They'd met in primary school. So Priscilla grew up to be a really beautiful woman. At 18, while on a seaside holiday with her family, she was crowned Miss Radcliffe. Jeff and Priscilla married in the Methodist Church back in 1962, and they would have 3 children. Vanessa was the oldest, Allison was their middle daughter, and they had a son, Ashley, who was the baby of the family. Priscilla and Jeff were married for almost 50 years, and they were retired and preparing to renew their vows when Allison disappeared. Their celebration was canceled, and their lives would never be the same, of course.
Now, there were over 200 girls and boys auditioning for a new ballet company, and this was a company that Allison just was dying to be a part of back in 1978. So fewer than 30 of these kids, all between the ages of 8 and 14, were accepted into the company. Now, Allison was one of the young dancers. She was 10 years old, and she didn't make the cut, but she did make the reserve list and would be offered a place if another child left. A year later, she was on stage at the 12th Night Theater in Bowen Hill's world premiere of 3 original ballets. Allison and the other dancers traveled the country for performances that were often sold out, so she was moderately famous and talented.
Yeah, but these cutthroat things for kids always kind of irritate me. I guess as a liberal person, I think, why can't all the kids do it, you know? But I guess that's totally beside the point. Then we get into my whole idea about sports, which I know you don't agree with.
Well, all I would say,
yeah,
life isn't fair.
Absolutely, it's not.
And it can't be fair for everybody.
No, but why can't everybody just have fun and play a game? Who cares who's the best?
We'll talk about that.
I guess some people do. I know.
Okay.
But I just think that aside from that, being a ballerina is a lot of pressure, right? Because not only do you have to be skilled, you have to be rail thin.
You have to be slender.
Yes.
Yep.
Which can be, trouble for women as they get older and then they get into anorexia, and it's a tough road.
Similar, I think, to gymnasts, women gymnasts.
Absolutely.
You're great when you're pre-pubertal.
Mm-hmm.
But puberty has a way of messing up careers.
Right.
So along with many of the other ballet parents, Allison's parents, Priscilla and Jeff, pitched in as chaperones, drivers, carpenters, dressmakers, doing whatever else was needed. In July 1980, thanks to fundraising from parents and children, enough money was raised for the group to fly out of Australia for a month-long tour of the United Kingdom.
That's a long flight.
Australia to London, to England, you bet. So ballet was the center of Allison's life until 1984. However, she hit puberty, and she lost her thin dancer's figure and then lost her place in the ballet company. She never returned, but her experiences would influence the rest of her life.
And maybe not all in a positive way.
Maybe
she was
not.
very insecure, very body conscious. Maybe this ballet thing is part of the problem.
Well, I think so. You know, there's a lot of Allison as an adult that could be traced back to her ballet years.
Absolutely.
She still acted somewhat like that young ballerina in that she was determined, she worked hard, and was striving for perfection.
And perfectionism is a hard way to live your life.
No kidding.
Yeah, it really is.
I learned,
Not that I have any experience with it.
I learned that a long time ago.
Yeah, you grew past that because I'm sure you wanted to be perfect when you were young.
Well, sure.
I never had that problem.
But I always tell people
Yeah.
that there's going to come a time in your life that you're going to find out that you're not perfect.
You can't always be the best.
You cannot always be the best. There's always someone that's going to one-up you.
Right.
So
That's a
just
hard
be ready
lesson.
for that.
Yep. Well, her time as a dancer also shaped her life in a lot of other ways. International trips gave Allison a taste of travel and really opened her mind to the world beyond Ipswich. After she finished high school, 17-year-old Allison went overseas, actually for a year-long Rotary exchange in Denmark. At a stop in Japan, she shared a room with a fellow Rotarian who was bound for Denmark, Linda Drinnen. Linda was from Camden, southwest of Sydney, and the two girls became very close friends. During their year abroad, they traveled all over the place together. One 18-day European tour took them to Paris, Venice, Vienna, Salzburg, and Monte Carlo. But Allison loved Paris the most. Her best friend from school, Carrie Ann Cummings, was also in Denmark on a student exchange. Both Linda and Carrie Ann celebrated her 18th birthday with Allison at her host family's home right outside Copenhagen. Linda was really impressed with Allison's outward composure and confidence during their trips as they went from one country to another. Linda was always leading, and Allison just kind of calmly followed, no stress. Linda would have a map, always sure where she was and where she was going, but Allison really had no idea and kind of went with the flow. She was very easygoing, never in a rush. On one trip, Allison and Linda stopped at a small shop, and they bought some identical bracelets and rings. This pink jewelry was cheap, but it ended up being a very meaningful keepsake for Linda. In April of 2012, Linda was at home in Camden, New South Wales, when she read a late-night text from her sister, which read, "Are you still awake? Allison from Brisbane is missing." So Linda felt sick and called her sister back right away. It was on the TV news, her sister said. Linda and her husband Stephen went to their computer and they clicked on the Courier Mail. There was a front page story, and it actually did say that Allison had disappeared. This was just surreal.
In the following days, Linda would see Allison's face on TV every single day. Now, at first, she hoped Allison might show up at her door. In the back of her mind, she thought Allison could be running from something bad, and she would need a safe place to hide. She fished through her jewelry box where she had kept the pink ring and matching bracelet that she and Allison had bought together in Denmark. Now, she knew Allison had kept hers also. So for the first time in 26 years, Linda put them on. This made her feel closer to Allison, and she didn't take these off for months.
Yeah, after that. In 1990, Allison met scuba instructor and former soldier Ian Drayton, and they both were working on Huron Island. So this couple, they bought 2 properties together, moved to Brisbane, and ended up getting engaged.
If only.
If only that had worked out.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something a lot of people in Allison's life would think. What if she just stayed with Ian? She might still be here today. Well, she probably would be, right?
Yeah, what's the likelihood that you marry 2 domestic abuse people?
Well, now that you say that, people do kind of pick out these people.
Exactly.
So we don't know, but the likelihood that she would have been murdered, of course, is pretty low.
Right. So Ian was a scuba diving instructor, and he dove in Heron's waters for a couple of years. The freedom of his job was a refreshing change from his former career in the Australian Army. So he used to be a corporal in Perth's Campbell Barracks. Now he injured his knee playing rugby for the Army, and this ended his chance to be a beret. I guess that's like the Green Berets in the United States, some specialized...
Yeah, I don't know.
part.
That's the assumption I'm making.
Right, I would.
Yeah.
So while in the military for 6.5 years, he learned to scuba dive and he became a civilian instructor. Then when he left the Army, he headed to Heron. The warm waters had hundreds of species of fish, manta rays, reef sharks, and coral. So his laid-back island life was filled with explorations in the ocean, having fun with friends. That's kind of an idyllic thing to do, isn't it?
Seems like the perfect life for a bachelor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Here you are, you're out of the military, you maybe at a little bit of a loose end, trying to figure out what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
What a great job.
Yeah, if you aren't terrified of being under in the ocean.
Well,
if you don't have phobias and problems.
I'm going to assume that he had no phobias about having a mask on and being underwater.
Absolutely, and I do envy that. I bet it's an amazing thing to do. Ian would say he wasn't looking for anyone special in his life at that point, but Allison did get his attention. He fell for her, and they began a really intense romance. With limited experience traveling, he really admired how Allison had done so much with her life. I mean, she'd been all over the place.
She had.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Her passport must have been filled.
Can you imagine 17 and have done all that traveling?
Yeah.
I'm very envious of that. And he really loved her quirky, fun-loving personality. She was just so laid back and fun. When it came to how the world worked, Allison was surprisingly naive. She was easygoing, laid back, and happy. And as the relationship progressed, Allison changed her plans and stayed on the island to be with him. She learned scuba diving, and Ian started learning Japanese. When Allison decided it was time for her to leave the island, Ian gave up his job and followed her south. They took the serious step of moving in together. Now, of course, their first home was a cheap little 2-bedroom rental unit in Brisbane's western suburbs. Allison took a job in the city as a sales agent for Flight Centre, and that's a large travel firm. The company was a good fit for Allison because she loved travel, and she wanted to learn different languages. But Ian wasn't sure what he was going to do with his life at that point. An Army friend had a couple of real estate agencies and hired him as an agent in Red Bank Plains, and that was near Allison's childhood home, so that seemed like a good situation. Although, do you really want to be a real estate agent? You have to be a certain type of personality to do sales, I believe.
You got to be a salesman.
You do.
So when Allison had gone off to Heron, her parents certainly weren't expecting her to return with a new man in her life. So this was a pretty big deal for the family when Allison moved in with Ian. Now, they didn't rent their little starter place for long. They bought a house together in March of 1991. This is a large brick 2-story house with a 2-car garage and a big yard. So the plan was to start a family there sometime in the future. They were moving right along in this relationship.
Yeah, it's not the kind of place you buy if you're going to just be a couple. It's a place for a family.
Right. So Ian planned an elaborate marriage proposal. He booked a limo. It arrived at their house, and the chauffeur drove them to a nice restaurant in Chapel Hill, where Ian had a table reserved for the dinner. Weeks before the dinner, he had picked out a diamond engagement ring, and he had taken one of Allison's other rings to the jewelry store to get her size just right.
So I don't know about that. I kind of feel like a woman should pick her own ring, unless you want to be surprised.
I'm ambivalent about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think on the one hand, it shows that you're serious about getting married. He's picking this ring for himself.
Yeah, there is something nice about the surprise of it.
Right.
The proposal that you don't expect.
But I'm with you. I think something of this magnitude, you ought to have a say in it.
Yeah.
The recipient of the ring.
I guess the ideal thing is to look at them non-committally for a while so that he knows what you want, and then he surprises you when he does it. That would be the ideal.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, it's all up to the person, I guess. But it does show caring that he did that he went out and did that. I see it as a positive.
I see it as a positive also.
Yeah. So they're at the restaurant, they have candlelight, and he hands her the ring and proposes. So she was very happy and cried and said yes. And family and friends celebrated the engagement by having a party at the Ipswich home of her aunt and uncle, Julie and Don Moore, where they had beer and wine and homemade food, and they rented a big tent. Allison's best friend, Carrie Ann Cummings, couldn't join them because she was living in London. But soon after, Allison and Ian went and stayed with her at her Wimbledon flat. So the three of them went for a week on the road in Ireland. Sounds like so much fun. Allison took Ian with her to Denmark to visit the host family from her exchange trip. When travel agents were offering cheap fares to New Guinea, Allison and Ian planned another trip. So did Allison's other friend, Linda, who had followed her into a job at Flight Centre, along with her boyfriend, who would later become Linda's husband. Now the four of them went on holiday together with Ian leading the way on a scuba diving trip where they went over some sunken plane wrecks, which sounds fascinating. Ian was actually a very outdoorsy type, and he and Stephen, Linda's boyfriend, got along great. Now, they still had to be very careful with their money, of course. And they were, and Allison and Ian were able to buy a second home together, and they rented it out for income. So pretty smart. Financially, they were really set up for a secure future. A wedding, a family, and a life together seemed to be coming together for them.
It certainly did. Allison entered a Miss Brisbane contest in 1993. She thought it was a fun way to get back on stage for the first time since her ballet days, and also an opportunity to raise money for charity. Now, the fundraising took up most of Allison's spare time, but her efforts were rewarded, and she was named Miss Brisbane. Now, the excitement of becoming Miss Brisbane was dampened by the fact that her relationship with Ian wasn't going so well. Ian was in the audience, but he was not a fan of the awards. He couldn't understand why Allison would want to enter, and he wasn't very supportive.
No, so this is when she started having second thoughts about the engagement. And I'm not sure what the actual problem was, other than maybe they were kind of growing apart, doing different things.
Yeah, because I just don't see how this Miss Brisbane contest would be enough to drive a big wedge between them.
Oh, no, I think that was just a symptom.
There had to be other things going on.
Absolutely, just one of many things that he did not like. But then she didn't feel supported, so that's not good either.
Right.
But yeah, I think there was some trouble right from the beginning because they never actually had started planning their wedding. They were engaged, but it wasn't getting anywhere. Maybe he wasn't big into commitment, who knows. But Allison was the one who went ahead and ended things and moved out, so it seems, at least in this point in her life, she was a strong person who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to, do things her way. Although that seems to change when she gets together with Gerard.
It does.
But But when she broke up with Ian, he was quite devastated, a little surprised by it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think he was expecting that for a reaction.
No.
So Ian quit real estate, and he went back to the Great Barrier Reef, and he worked there as a dive instructor. So Allison took one of their houses, Ian got the other one. Now, Allison wanted to move forward with her life. She started a relationship with a dentist, and they took a trip to Europe. Boy, they're still traveling, huh?
I'm amazed by the travel.
So this is a great story, though. While they were in London, the dentist abandoned her right out of the blue at a train station. So she's standing alone on the platform, pretty clueless about what was going on. So instead of leaving right away, she met up with her friend Carrie and continued her holiday.
So again, that shows that she was an independent person.
Yeah, she didn't just melt.
No, she didn't go running home.
Now, the interesting thing is that while they were continuing the holiday, they're walking down a street in Prague, and they saw the dentist walking with another woman on his arm. Allison and Carrie Ann thought this was just hilarious. And this fickle dentist would become a long-running joke between them.
Yes, they called him Dickhead something, whatever his name was. But they seemed to have a lot of laughs about that.
Well, I think just the fact that she could look back on it and laugh is a good thing for her.
Right. And not be crushed by it. Well, after she returned to Brisbane, Allison got back with Ian. And soon she was traveling 1,600 kilometers from Brisbane to Lizard Island to visit him. Ian thought they were back together for good, but Allison was kind of half in, half out, kind of unsure of the whole thing. And she didn't tell Ian, but she had already met someone new. She'd been promoted to run an office at Ipswich, and after that she was promoted again to Human Resources Manager. Her new job was based on the second floor of a building on George Street in Brisbane. And there she had caught the eye of Gerard Baden-Clay. He was the team manager of the company's new 24-hour call center that was run in the same building. Now to her, Gerard was boyishly handsome, he had a really nice smile, and he had been raised to have perfect manners. He supervised staff for clients so that they could book flights, tours, or hotels at any hour. They met when Allison was having trouble with her computer one day, and he went and helped her. And that's when they first became friendly.
Yeah, now the first thing, though, that Gerard tried to do was to set Allison up with a friend of his. When they were all out of town at a manager's conference, Gerard organized a dinner, and he made sure Allison and his friend Walton were sitting opposite one another. Gerard sat nearby, and was regretting setting them up. He wanted Allison for himself. So yeah, you know.
So that's interesting. Did he really only want her once he saw that his friend might be interested? Because that's a whole thing that people do.
Well, let's be charitable.
Okay.
And say that he realized he made a mistake, that he had feelings for her, and didn't want to set her up with anyone else. He wanted her.
But if you met someone that you were attracted to and then this person set you up with their friend, that would hurt your feelings.
Well, but you don't know that there's this setup going on, right?
Oh, that's true.
You're just people going out for dinner or whatever.
That's true. So he didn't say, oh, I want to set you up with my friend.
No.
So she might not even have known.
That would put a whole different spin on things.
Exactly.
To my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was thinking. So so he decided he liked her.
Yeah. And he walked Allison home after that little conference or dinner date. And at the hotel room door, they kissed.
So there must have been an immediate attraction
there. She must have thought he was okay.
I think so.
And besides him thinking she looks great.
Yes. Well, aside from being a real jerk and ending up being a terrible murdering person, he did seem kind of charming and good-looking, at least in the beginning to her.
I like how you put that. With these minor little peccadillos.
Right. Yeah. Allison invited Gerard to her family's Christmas get-together that year. Every year, her uncles, aunts, and cousins gathered at a family member's house, and these were very casual, noisy family get-togethers. For Gerard, this was kind of unusual because he had come from a more formal background, and he wasn't really comfortable in this situation. And he didn't get off to the best start with Allison's family. As about 50 of her relatives were laughing and chatting and having a good time, he went into a bedroom alone to do work. And Allison made excuses for him, saying he had a lot going on at work and was always on call for this new 24-hour division. And in the interest of charity, I would say that's reasonable.
Sure. I would say that's a plausible idea, right?
Well, and not all of us come from these big, boisterous families, and it can be intimidating.
It can be.
Yeah.
And this is a brand new call center, and he's managing it. So I'm sure he felt like he needed to do everything possible to make it successful.
Absolutely. I could see that would be a 24-hour-a-day job.
However, Gerard had already set the tone for his relationship with Allison's family. They felt like he considered himself above them. Now, Allison didn't feel that way. She thought Gerard was charming, and she liked that he was hardworking and ambitious. Plus, he treated her like a princess. Nevertheless, Allison felt like she got caught in the middle. Her parents and family on one side, Gerard on the other.
Sure.
What do you do?
Well, Ian had been down to Brisbane to see Allison, and at that point she couldn't make up her mind which of them she wanted to be with. Ian seemed like the safer choice, but Gerard's charm was impossible for her to resist. Gerard always seemed to know the right thing to say at the right time, just a real charmer. When Ian visited Brisbane again, he and Allison had met up at a hotel, and Allison had decided she had to make a decision, Ian or Gerard. She didn't want to hurt Ian, and she was extremely stressed out about that. She ended up having a serious asthma attack, and Ian took her to the ER. Allison broke up with Ian that night and told him that she was seeing Gerard, and he was really blindsided and pretty heartbroken for a long time after that. Allison would later confide to her friends how she had made up her mind between choosing Ian and Gerard that weekend, which was kind of a weird random thing, almost like flipping a coin, really.
It was. So in the hotel with Ian in Brisbane, she had left some clothes on the bed and gone for a shower. And when she came out, the clothes were still there, crumpled and unmoved. On another night with Gerard, when she'd put her clothes on the bed and gone for a shower, she returned to find Gerard had neatly ironed them and hung them up. Some people would see this more as controlling behavior from Gerard.
I think I would.
I would too, but Allison thought that this was a sign that he cared for her more than Ian did. And that was how she came to make the most fateful decision of her life.
Well, moreover, Dick, I could see that as being maybe he's the more husband potential type of guy, the guy you might have a family with and settle down with.
Gerard.
Yes, because he's neat, he's taking care of things, and maybe Ian was a little more loosey-goosey.
That could be.
And that's kind of the picture I get.
I'm not sure I'm buying into this version of how nice it was for Gerard to iron her clothes and hang them up, and Ian just left them on a heap on the bed.
I don't know. I think I'd like that.
What?
If someone ironed my clothes and stuff for me, I think I'd like that.
I don't think so.
You wouldn't like that?
I wouldn't.
If I did that for you? I do that for you, don't I?
And I do that for you.
Right, and we like it.
Well, okay, maybe so, but we don't expect it.
No. And maybe it was a little presumptuous because they're not married yet, right? For him to go ahead and take care of her clothes might have been a bit much. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But I mean,
a little
it's
presumptuous.
at the heart of it, it's just a little insignificant thing, which probably shouldn't have made her choice based on that.
Right.
Right.
That's exactly it.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Now, Allison's friend Carrie Ann would remember Allison excitedly telling her about Gerard's family connection to Scouting founder Lord Baden-Powell. Allison was impressed with Gerard's family. Allison had always wanted a Prince Charming, and Gerard certainly fitted that part perfectly. He was thoughtful and generous throughout their entire courtship. Whenever Allison would go away for work, she checked into her hotel to find flowers and her favorite magazines and snacks waiting in her room.
I would love that.
Now that's pretty cool.
Just so you know, I would love that.
Okay. No, it's noted. Gerard would call ahead to arrange things for her.
Which is really nice.
It is. I think that's a nice touch. And to me, that's a nicer touch than picking up your clothes and ironing them and hanging them up.
Okay. Well, when Allison married Gerard in 1997, it wasn't like she was just marrying a man. She was marrying a whole family dynasty. He'd always been really proud to claim Scouting founder Lord Baden-Powell as his great-grandfather. This family fame he was so proud of was based on a strength in adversity, living by your wits, and using cunning and deception to outmaneuver adversaries. So let's go over the history of this a little bit. What do we know about this whole family?
Here's some of the backstory here.
Okay.
In 1899, British Colonel Robert Stevenson Smythe Baden-Powell was surrounded and vastly outnumbered. The South African Republic had declared war on Britain. Well, they were a territory of Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So Baden-Powell was charged with defending the British-held town of Mafeking. A force of up to 8,000 aggressors had laid siege to the town. With only 1,000 men, which included untrained townspeople, Baden-Powell turned to the art of deception. So he was aware the enemy was watching him from afar. He'd have his men bury empty boxes in a field to give the impression they were burying landmines. And he wanted the enemy to have second thoughts about approaching, so men were also ordered to pretend to crawl under barbed wire on the perimeter, even though none was there. So they were going to fool the people in the distance into thinking they'd have difficulty charging the town.
This is pretty brilliant.
Pretty clever.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing he would do, or one of the other things he would do, was fire rifles on one side of the outpost, then rush to the other side and fire again. And this would conceal a shortage of firearms. Another thing would be searchlights moving around to create the impression an assault from any direction would be exposed. So for 217 days, Baden-Powell held the enemy at bay until a British relief force finally broke the siege in May of 1900.
This is a story passed down in the family for generations.
This is a big story. So he's 43 years old, and Baden-Powell is a national hero. He withstood the siege until reinforcements could arrive. This is a big thing.
Uh-huh.
So he returned to Britain to find that a handbook he'd previously published for soldiers called Aids to Scouting had become a hit with the general population. So at the suggestion of Boys Brigade founder William Smith, Baden-Powell wrote a new version for a younger audience. He tested his ideas at a camp in 1907, which was the first Boy Scout camp. Scouting for Boys was released in 1908. Boys throughout Britain began forming their own scout patrols and troops. At a meeting the next year at the Crystal Palace in South London, 11,000 scouts turned up. So there was also groups of girls in the crowd, and they declared themselves Girl Scouts. So this prompted Baden-Powell to write a new book for them, too.
So we could actually maybe thank him for the delicious cookies, which several of the varieties are vegan.
We could thank him indirectly, I guess.
Right.
It's a bit of a stretch, but that's okay.
Uh-huh.
So this family, though, would become accustomed to controversy. And there was a lot of controversy. Critics and biographers would condemn Baden-Powell for many things over the years. He's been labeled a mass murderer for starving Africans in Mafeking. and as a brute for executing an African prisoner after promising him mercy. He was a plagiarist and a charlatan to others for copying ideas for the scouting movement from British author Ernest Thompson Seton. And others suggest that he had an ulterior motive for his Boy Scout movement, citing comments he made about photographs and artwork involving nude boys.
It's not good.
So here we get into some pedophilia and stuff. Some suspect he was a repressed homosexual, pointing to an unusually close relationship he had with a male friend.
But a homosexual is different from a pedophile. Totally different thing.
Totally different. And the most dangerous challenge to his legacy has been that some scoutmasters have abused their positions to prey on boys.
That's true. I haven't heard much about that lately, but that was a thing. Is that still a thing? I haven't heard anything about it.
It's still in the background.
Well, I know my Girl Scout, one of my troop leaders, was awful and used to hit us. If that has anything to do with it.
I don't know.
No, it doesn't. Okay. Well, growing up, Gerard really didn't stand out much. He attended Gababar State School and then Toowoomba Grammar School. And I apologize for some pronunciation issues I'll probably have throughout this story. But there were 696 students, 408 of whom were boarders at Toowoomba Grammar when Gerard was in his final year. With parents who lived locally, he was in what they called the day boy minority. He was probably bullied, but he had a brother and sister that he was close with. When his family began going by the full Baden-Clay name, some neighbors thought that was very pretentious and they were snobby.
Well, I could see that.
Why would you do that?
I mean, they were Clay forever.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they're Baden-Clay.
Well, yeah, because they want to have that recognition, I guess.
So I think that's kind of snobbish.
Yeah, I agree. Now, Gerard didn't get into the drinking culture much in college. In university, he and his friends would spend hours playing cards when they weren't in lectures or doing their studying. Gerard signed up for officer training with the Australian Army Reserves, and he and other recruits were taken on a ride to Gatton, where the Queensland Agricultural Training Unit was based. Later, they went to Brisbane for medical and psychological testing. Military theory was combined with field trips that sometimes lasted for weeks. Gerard was seeing a young woman who had enlisted at the same time, and that would be his first serious relationship. After 3 years of study, Gerard took a graduate job with an accounting firm, KPMG Pete Marwick, in Brisbane. Years later, in a court affidavit, Gerard said he earned his business degree over 5 years, so was partway through when he started the firm.
Yeah, and this, I think, was a pretty big deal. He started with this firm, a big accounting firm, even before he got his degree. That's pretty good. So he was hired along with 20 or 30 other graduates that year and started his first real job in Central Plaza 1, which is a newly opened high-rise office tower. Gerard started in the company's audit division, so he was given the opportunity to complete more training to become a chartered accountant. After a year as an accountant for a workwear company, Gerard became a travel agent with a burgeoning flight center chain in 1994.
Now, I'm not sure, but is a travel agent something an accountant usually goes into doing? I wouldn't think so.
So he left his accounting job.
Yeah, strange. Strange that he ended up in sales, although I guess he had the personality for that kind of thing.
He certainly did. So the flight center chain was recruiting university graduates at a time when jobs were hard to come by. Gerard was living in Wavell Heights in Brisbane's North End with his parents and brother until he moved into Flight Center's George Street building in the city to head a new 24-hour telephone service. And after he was in this new office is when he met his future wife, Allison. So Gerard got down on one knee and proposed to Allison beneath a replica of the Eiffel Tower in inner city Brisbane. I didn't know they had one of those.
Well, how would you know that?
Well, I don't know. I guess I wouldn't.
No.
It just seems kind of weird.
Yeah.
Allison was a fan of Paris. Gerard thought that this was the best place in lieu of traveling to the real Paris.
Kind of cute.
Kind of cute. Allison, though, wasn't in a hurry to get married, and she wasn't waiting on a proposal, so she asked for a week to think about it. And then after a week, she said, "Yes, I'll marry you."
So this is different from what she did with Ian. She accepted right away.
Right away.
So I wonder why.
She still thought about Ian.
You think so?
Sure.
Maybe she thought that Gerard was the more, sensible choice. he was more successful.
Maybe she was settling for things that she didn't want to have to settle for.
Yeah.
I mean, she's picturing Gerard as a stable, ambitious breadwinner.
And maybe he's the one she thought she could have a family with, because she did want to have a family.
Right. And she's maybe more in love with Ian, but just as unsure about what their future together would be. So she opted for the apparently safe choice.
I suppose, but it just seems like once she was with Gerard, she was extremely determined to make that marriage work. And
sure.
I wonder, was that based on love, or was that more like not wanting to fail?
The latter.
Because she was a perfectionist.
Yep.
So that's a whole interesting aspect of that. But she did say yes, like you said, and they drove down to see Allison's parents and tell them in person. What Gerard did was he dropped Allison at a shop on the ruse of getting some bread while he went on his own to ask Jeff, her dad, for his daughter's hand in marriage. Gerard asked his father, Nigel, for advice on whether he should talk to the Dickies before or after he proposed to Allison, and Nigel said it was best to ask Allison first in case she said no.
Good counsel.
Yeah. So Allison and Gerard went out and picked out a diamond ring together. Gerard asked his dad when he should get married. So this was a very close-knit family. You know, how many guys ask their dad when they should get married? I don't know.
Oh, I never did.
No. But Nigel looked at the calendar and his own wedding anniversary and saw that it was on a Saturday that year in 1997. So he suggested they get married on Gerard's parents' anniversary. And Allison agreed to that. So that's what they did. And once the date was set, Allison's friends organized a tea party, which I guess is kind of like a shower.
I think so.
I have to ask our Australian friends to tell us, but that's the kind of impression I got. And over champagne and some finger food, the guests told stories from her childhood and all her travels. Her friends really admired Allison. After her success with the Miss Brisbane Awards, she'd been named Ipswich's Young Businesswoman of the Year. Her success in business was really continuing, too. She was promoted to Flight Center's Global Human Resources Manager in 1995, and she was only 27. Allison wasn't the type to brag about her achievements. Whenever her friends saw her, she'd ask what they were up to rather than talk about herself. So she seemed to have a genuine interest in other people. And at the kitchen tea party, everyone was just, letting her know how much they appreciated her. They were giving her lots of attention. And as Allison was showered with attention on this evening before the wedding, Gerard's mother, Elaine Baden-Clay, decided for some reason that they needed to change the focus. So she just came out and said, "Well, enough about Allison, let's talk about Gerard." And this seemed like an odd thing to say. And this is the women getting ready to talk about the wedding and everything.
These are the women. It's not a stag party for men.
Right. So she brings her son up.
Yeah. To me, that's kind of weird.
Yeah. They're a little bit of a strange family.
They are. Allison asked her sister Vanessa, friends Carrie Ann and Linda, and Gerard's sister Olivia to be her bridesmaids. All five shared a room together in a city hotel the night before the wedding. Women all huddled together in the same bed in their pajamas for a group photo, and Allison gave her bridesmaids earrings to wear the next day during the wedding. Gerard had asked his brother Adam and his school friend Bob Cheeseman to be his groomsmen. The wedding was a beautiful affair held at St. Mary's Anglican Church on Brisbane's Kangaroo Point Cliffs in August of 1997. There were about 100 guests there to witness Gerard and Allison take their vows. The wedding party took a ferry across the Brisbane River for the reception, which was being held in historic Customs House in the city. Now, Allison threw her bouquet over her shoulder, and they cut a 4-tier white cake.
So pretty traditional.
Sounds
what you would expect, except the one weird thing was that there was no alcohol.
Yeah, what's going on with that?
I don't know, because they were both social drinkers, and this surprised the guests. I mean, Flight Center had frequent social get-togethers where they'd be out late into the night, and some of their work colleagues were really kind of flabbergasted to find out that there's no booze. Before the wedding, Allison had told some of her close friends that Gerard had decided there would be no alcohol. I think this was just a financial decision. And I don't know if I want to put it on them, but isn't that the groom's parents who usually pay the bar bill?
Oh, there's all sorts of traditions.
Right.
I don't know.
And this is another country, but
it seems like a cheap thing to do.
I've always thought that's really a way to cheap out.
It's not going to be that expensive.
Well, I mean, the bar bill can be a lot. But I've always thought, that's kind of a cheap out thing to do. Just invite less people, if you can't afford it.
So.
Especially if you're doing it in the evening and it's a party atmosphere.
It's definitely weird. And
because, not even any champagne or anything.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to not have it.
Right.
Except that Gerard wants to save money.
Well, and there were a lot of whispered complaints that he was just too cheap to pay for an open bar. Some people actually went off to where there was a bar and bought their own drinks.
Yeah, I guess there's ways around that.
Oh, there always is, yeah.
So Jeff Dickey stood up to make his speech as the father of the bride, and he spoke of his love for his daughter, but he also had a message for Gerard. "She's my princess. You look after her," he told his new son-in-law. Now, Carrie Ann, Allison's friend, hadn't approved of Gerard when they started dating. She didn't think he was good enough for Allison, but she didn't really think anyone could be good enough for Allison. Gerard, who was trying to win her over, took her out to coffee one day and said, "You don't really like me, do you?" And Carrie Ann had agreed.
So she's honest.
Yeah. Well, she said everything always seemed to be about him, his career, his travel plans, his family.
That's not what you want for your friend.
No. Now, as maid of honor, she stood up to say a few words and basically echoed Allison's father. "You better take care of her, otherwise you'll have me to answer to," she said.
Yeah.
So these are kind of interesting toasts, huh?
Yeah. So, there's a little something in the air.
Something
right
in
from
the
the
air.
beginning.
Yep.
But speeches were a big strength of the Baden-Clay family. When Gerard stood to speak to his guests, he had a lot to say. He thanked his parents, calling them Mummy and Daddy. The speech went on and on. Some guests swore that Gerard's speech lasted an hour and a half, which would be remarkable.
That would be a world record, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so that would be tough. But at the end of the night, the newlyweds left in a little red sports car that had been decorated by their friends. Gerard was driving, and there was a big white sign on the passenger side door, which read, "Under new management."
Cute.
That's cute.
So Gerard and Allison's married life started with a fancy overseas honeymoon that turned into a working holiday, a pretty lengthy working holiday.
Gosh, I guess these people traveled.
Carrie Ann and both sets of parents were at Brisbane Airport to see them off 1 week after they had gotten married. So they stopped for a brief layover in Kuala Lumpur, and then they spent 10 days at a resort in the Maldives. This island stay was followed by a 16-day tour of Turkey, a couple weeks in Jordan, a tour through Israel, a couple more weeks in Egypt, then another 2 weeks in Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. Then, for a few weeks, they traveled through Northwest Europe, through the Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland.
So through our entire marriage, we haven't done a fraction of that traveling.
No, and they did this in the first weeks after their marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
So Gerard was excited to take Allison to the International Scout Center at Kandersteg in the Swiss Alps. As a living link to the original Chief Scout, Gerard was very welcome around the lodges and campsites. I'll bet he loved that.
Yeah.
Then they moved on to the United Kingdom, and they stayed with Gerard's grandparents in Somerset before they found work in London. So Gerard took a job at Blockbuster International as a financial systems consultant in January 1998, and he would become the main breadwinner. Allison, who had once quickly moved up the ranks at Flight Center, ended up in a low-paid position at Dale Carnegie Training.
That's disappointing.
So right away, she's taking a lesser role, I guess you could say.
Well, in that aspect, because I think her plan was to start a family and be home with kids. So I think she willingly was doing that.
Okay.
That's my understanding of it.
I still think it would be a tough thing.
Well,
Here
sure.
she's an up-and-comer, and granted, you're going to want to have kids and all that, but she's moving up the ranks, and she can't find anything but this low-paying job.
Well, I think maybe he wanted to be the breadwinner,
I would agree.
and he wanted her to be more dependent on him. But they took advantage of being in Brisbane that July to drop into a traveler's medical center because they had a 3-month trip across South America planned for the end of the year.
More travel.
Yep. So they were offered a choice of preventative medication for malaria. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Malaria?
Well, the medication they took and all that happened afterwards. This was kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of a thing. I mean, it wasn't the cause. It might have unearthed some psychological problems.
Right.
But I don't think it was the cause. But anyway, you're going to be taking some preventative medicine for malaria. So you start it before you go on your trip, and you take it throughout the trip, and then you continue taking it for a short time after the trip.
Right, and they had a couple of choices?
They had a couple of choices. One was something that you had to take daily, and the other was called Lariam. This was a weekly dose. So the doctors that they had seen warned them that Lariam could be unsuitable for people with a history of mental illness. Gerard and Allison said, well, that's not an issue. And they chose Lariam because it's once a week instead of 7 times a week.
Yeah, that's a lot more convenient.
So Lariam is the brand name for a drug containing mefloquine, which is a synthetic alternative to quinine. And back in the day, quinine was the treatment of malaria.
Mm-hmm.
That's why everybody in the British Empire that served in, like, say, India or someplace would drink gin and tonics. Because they drank the quinine water. Now, the United States Defense Department Biomedical Research Unit developed mefloquine in the 1970s for use in troops. Then they struck a deal that allowed Swiss pharmaceutical giant Roche the rights to develop the drug. In 1989, it was approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, as we know, the FDA, and was marketed to civilian travels under the name Lariam. So considered at the time to be safer than equivalent drugs, it soon became the most popular anti-malarial on the U.S. market. However, there started to be some reports of adverse reactions, which included amnesia and really vivid hallucinations.
That's kind of scary.
Now, some of these were attributed to recreational drug use or to travel stress, but the number of reports became compelling. So sufferers reported vivid, often terrifying nightmares, voices murmuring and mumbling, plagued by a sense of impending doom, morbid visual hallucinations. So much so that in the early 1990s, UN peacekeeping troops and UK-based flight crews were banned from taking the drug because of concerns about its psychological effects.
Well, yeah, you don't want to be flying a plane with that happening.
So it wasn't until the early 2000s, which was years after Allison's experience with Lariam in 1998, that the effect on the traveling public started really being taken seriously. Although Lariam is no longer marketed as a brand in the United States, generic antimalarials containing mefloquine are still available. They certainly are.
And no problems that you've seen?
No problems that we've seen. Now, the United States FDA warns that side effects can include anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, depression, restlessness, unusual behavior, and confusion. And these side effects can persist even after the medication is stopped. So author David McLean charted the effects of Lariam in his book, The Answer to the Riddle is Me, a memoir of amnesia.
That is a fascinating book.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, McLean woke up on a train station platform in India with no idea at all who he was or where he was, and he ended up in a psychiatric hospital suffering with bouts of severe hallucinations.
Terrifying.
Very.
Well, after attending 2 weddings in Brisbane, Allison and Gerard had returned to the South Centre in the Swiss Alps to complete 3 months of volunteer work. In September 1998, they flew via Washington to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and they started taking the Lariam pills a couple of weeks earlier. They had chosen a challenging trip on a truck tour, so riding in the back of a truck, this was a long, uncomfortable ride from the east to the west coast through Bolivia, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Ecuador. It ended in Ecuador's capital. At times, the group of 16 volunteers would be camping on the way, and some other times they would be able to get a hotel room. But often they visited some big, dangerous cities. Allison, as we know, was well-traveled, but she didn't seem to have her usual thirst for adventure on this trip. Gerard thought he noticed her becoming very nervous, anxious, and withdrawn, and it became a real problem when they arrived in Potosi, Bolivia. They were in a hotel room, and Allison couldn't even get out of bed. They had plans for the day to go sightseeing at the silver mines, but she curled up on the bed and said she didn't want to go out. But she reported that this wasn't like a normal sick feeling, and she didn't need a doctor. It was more of a depression, anxiety type of thing. So Gerard left with the rest of the group and left her in the hotel room. The next day, she seemed back to normal, like nothing had happened. But Gerard thought that Allison's mood was continuing to fluctuate. Her distress wasn't confined to the tough travel areas. The same mood persisted in New York and on their way back to the UK. When they returned to Gerard's grandparents' home in Somerset, Allison really crashed. And she later spoke of being catatonic, freaking out, and suffering some very frightening hallucinations. Gerard took her to the local hospital where a doctor noticed that she was on Lariam, and the drug had to be taken, like you said, for a couple of weeks before and after, so she was still taking her weekly dose. For the first time, Allison realized that the pills that they were taking to prevent malaria may have been damaging her psyche, and the doctors said the drug would work itself out of her system. But some people think that maybe it never did, and maybe it contributed to some of her depression in the years that followed.
I think that's a possibility.
Yeah, but there was also the postpartum component to her depression.
It might have contributed. Yeah.
Right.
So after Christmas in 1998, Allison and Gerard went back to Kindersteg, where they had new 9-month contracts to work at the Scout Center. Gerard was the assistant director, so at times he would be supervising upwards of 50 staff people. Allison was running the shop and doing administrative work. So the job would look good on Gerard's CV, but he and Allison were working in return for only a small salary and their living expenses. Still, Gerard loved Kindersteg and didn't want to leave. He wanted to be the director. Now this would put him in line for some real money. Allison, however, saw no future for herself in Kindersteg. During this period, she wrote in her journal that she'd wanted to stay in Australia when she married. So even though Allison really would have preferred to be home, she and Gerard made plans to stay in Switzerland. They went back to the United Kingdom in September 1999 to complete a training course so Gerard could apply for the director's position at the Scout Center. So a director hurt his back, which left Gerard to fill the spot for a while. But it was only temporary, and he was never going to become director. So he finally gave up on getting the directorship position, and he and Allison returned to Australia in late 1999.
Well, they had actually intended to return to the UK, but while they were home, Flight Center had asked Allison to return to work. She met the company's new HR manager in November 1999, and she took a part-time job helping prepare the company's annual overseas conference. Gerard started trying to get work in the company too. He applied for a manager's position, but he didn't get it. He eventually found a spot on a new project. Keith Stanley, Flight Center's marketing boss, was putting together a new division called Global Online. In March 2000, 4 months after Allison returned to working at Flight Center, Gerard was given a 12-month contract there. But in August 2000, the project ended and Gerard lost his job. And he had a really hard time accepting that despite signing up for 12 months, the company was letting him go after just 6. He actually consulted an attorney and sued the company for breach of contract. Gerard claimed the firing was without reason or adequate reason. He said that he had been planning to return to live and work in the UK before he was recruited to work at Flight Center. And he also said that up until then he had been gainfully employed in Switzerland and the UK, which wasn't exactly true. But he was demanding that Flight Center pay him $59,500. Now, I think that financial problems were pretty big on their list of problems at that point for Gerard and Allison.
That's for sure. Can you imagine there must have been some panic as Christmas approached that year?
Because Christmas was a big deal in their families.
It's a big deal. And Gerard and Allison were renting a 3-bedroom townhouse just blocks from his parents, Nigel and Elaine. So it should have been an exciting time for Gerard and Allison because Allison was pregnant. She was 3 months along with their first baby. But excitement about the new arrival was dampened by Gerard's job loss. So with a baby on the way, he had to figure out how to make a living. He started doing some stock market trading from a home office in their garage. Now, Allison and Gerard's first child was born on July 3rd, 2001. Allison's mother, Priscilla, drove up from their home to help out after the birth. Priscilla was surprised to find a baby monitor in the kitchen that was set up with a connection to Gerard's garage office, so he could hear everything that was going on in the house. Priscilla told her family that whenever she went to speak to Allison, her daughter put her finger to her lips for her to be quiet. Once outside, Allison told her mom how Gerard could hear everything. Gerard explained that the monitor was there so Allison could just call his name and he could be at her side in moments.
Yeah.
Right. So Priscilla thought Allison was coping well as the new mom, and she didn't like the idea of Gerard listening in on her all the time. did seem weird and controlling, didn't it?
Yeah, it seems like there was some really controlling behavior going on in that marriage.
I mean, it's not that big a house. He doesn't need a monitor.
No, and the fact that she would allow it and leave it on is weird.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you just unplug the fucker?
Yeah.
Just weird. It seems like there's a lot of controlling going on that people outside the family are only seeing little glimpses of it.
Right.
So aside from the unusual setup at home, Jared's working life wasn't going very well. His stock market trading from home hit trouble on September 11th, 2001. The travel industry was in turmoil and his investments were at risk too. This was obviously the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center happened. And in a panic, they sold their Flight Center stocks. Jared was taking a first aid course to prepare for a new job when the terror attacks happened. He had been accepted to chaperone students from Brisbane's Boys' College on a trip to India and Nepal. But after the hijacked planes flew into the World Trade Center, the parents at BBC no longer wanted to send their children overseas, so that job fell through. So even though he was the main breadwinner, and he had a 6-month-old baby, Jared decided that was a good time to join his brother Adam on a holiday to Europe. Allison was left there to care for their daughter on her own. Now, thankfully, she did have the support of her parents, and after he returned, Jared continued working at the home office for a while, trying to make some money.
But then the real estate market took an upturn, and Gerard hit it. So in 1990, the median house price in Brisbane was about $118,000. Over the next 10 years, it grew, so by the time 2000 came around, it was $173,000. So that's almost a 50% increase. Over the next 7 years, from 2000 to 2007, the median house price really jumped, and it soared to $450,000. So the federal government's first home owner grant, which was introduced in 2000, also invigorated the market. And it wasn't just prices that were going up. The numbers of houses changing hands escalated to record highs too. So Jared was watching this, and he set his mind on a new career.
Makes sense.
Sure. And, I guess he's smart enough to figure this out, right?
I think so.
So for years, the number of real estate agents had remained static in Queensland. So from 1995 to 2002, there was a 9% increase in the number of licensed real estate agents. In 2003, it was a different story. This was the year Gerard joined the industry. And that year, there was a 29% increase in the number of licensed real estate agents, and a 92% jump in the number of registered salespeople. So Ray Leach and Jason Arnott were hiring for their firm, and they saw potential in Gerard when he first walked into their real estate office. They had launched their agency just a year earlier, and in their research for staff, they had run job ads in the classifieds of the local newspapers, and in walks Gerard. He had no property experience, but he was well-spoken and presented well, and he was college educated, and he did have a background in sales. He made such an impression in the interview that the two partners felt like Gerard was the one doing the interviewing. Gerard told them there were 2 other agencies he was considering. He had an impressive amount of confidence, and real estate is actually all about confidence. But Gerard had conditions. He wasn't coming on board alone. So if they wanted to hire him, they'd have to hire his parents also. So they might have seen a lot of things in their time, but the agents had never known someone to include his parents as a condition of employment. Nevertheless, they decided to give this unusual arrangement a try.
Well, from the day that they arrived, it was apparent to the rest of the staff that Gerard was very close to his mom and dad. Gerard, Nigel, and Elaine hugged and kissed each other often, in the office and out in public. Also, Gerard called his parents Mummy and Daddy around the office and in front of clients. That was odd, but some people thought it was endearing. Gerard did benefit from having his parents there to share the workload, that's for sure. One of the difficulties in real estate is finding properties to sell. It's especially hard for new agents who need to build a client base basically from scratch. Gerard left this mundane side of his job to his parents. Nigel and Elaine did most of the legwork. So this included working the phones, going out in the midday heat to put pamphlets in mailboxes, and knock door to door looking for sellers. Nigel and Elaine would round up a prospective client, and Gerard would step in and close the deal. His role was to convert the leads to sign with him. Then he would take the properties to the market and get them sold. Nigel and Elaine were both about to hit their 60s, but they had had a financial setback and they did need money. Nigel had progressed from working in life insurance sales to building up a financial planning business, but his planning for his own financial future hadn't worked out very well. He had sold his business as part of his retirement plan, but then he'd only received the initial payment. The rest never came through, so they basically had no retirement income. So, in that way, Gerard was doing them a favor. But Nigel and Elaine had to do the grunt work, and they seemed happy to do it. They really put their eldest son on a pedestal. They predicted that Gerard would become a successful businessman one day. While Gerard was moving forward in his new job, though, Allison had her own issues. She was pregnant with their second daughter. Now, she was happy to be having another child, but she was feeling a return of the overwhelming feelings of anxiety. This had been a battle for her for years. In September 2003, at 26 weeks pregnant, she decided to see a psychiatrist, Dr. Tom George, after referral from her general practitioner. And in the first consultation, Allison told him about her anxiety and depressed mood. Her frequent panic attacks included an incident when she was driving with her daughter. She had managed to pull over before she passed out, but now she was avoiding driving altogether, afraid that she would harm her daughter or even her unborn baby. So Dr. George diagnosed Allison with depression and panic attacks. He prescribed Zoloft, which is a brand name for the antidepressant sertraline. Gerard, who had taken Allison to the appointment, expressed reservations about the medication, and he would later admit that he didn't believe in depression and thought it was all in Allison's head. But Allison, thankfully, began taking the Zoloft at the usual starting dose of 50 milligrams a day. So this is a class of drugs known as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they control mood by increasing the amount of serotonin available in the brain. And after she'd taken this for a while, a weight really lifted for Allison. Within a month of starting the medication, she was feeling a lot better. By the time she gave birth to her second daughter in December 2003, she was pretty much symptom-free. The medication had done exactly what it was supposed to do. So she'd suffered for so long, and then figured out all she needed was this medication. And she kind of resented Gerard for not seeing that she needed help sooner and not taking her to get help. She felt like if she'd been physically ill or injured, he would have been right on it, but he wasn't taking mental illness seriously.
No, he didn't.
And there are people like that.
There are, unfortunately. So Gerard left his agency, his real estate agency, in 2004 and opened his own Century 21 agency. He started his own blog where he wrote that his interests were spending as much time as possible with my family, camping, traveling, and scouting. The blog became an outlet for him to share his strong views about ethics. At monthly meetings of the Kenmore Chamber of Commerce, Gerard's self-promotion could be a turnoff. Peter Newing, who was a real estate agent in Brisbane's western suburbs and principal of his own agency, found Gerard an insufferable prick. He'd brag about his brand in his office, and he'd always bring up the fact that he was related to Baden-Powell.
Annoying.
Tony McHugh and Robert McKay Wood chose Gerard's agency to sell their block of land in 2005, and Gerard began an affair that threatened his marriage and his career.
So tell us a little bit about Tony, the other woman.
The other woman. Tony was born in 1971 in Sydney. Her parents were faithful Catholics, but Tony was a rebellious teen, and at age 16 she got pregnant. Now, her relationship with the baby's father didn't last. Then in her early 20s, she met and moved in with Robert McKay Wood, who was 10 years older, and he became the stepfather to her son. In 2007, Tony emailed an application for a sales job with Gerard's office, and he hired her in April of that year. Now, Tony had a crush on her new boss from the beginning. Later, she would tell police, when I first started working with Gerard, there was definitely chemistry for me.
So after hiring Tony, Gerard continued to look like a devoted family man. Every day except Sundays, he would open the business at 8:30 a.m., and by 5 p.m. he'd head home to be with his family. For the first year, they worked side by side without straying from a professional relationship. But of course, that was going to change. Tony was working late in the office when it began. He asked me to kiss him, and I did, she told police later. Their pent-up sexual tension turned into a passionate affair. They kept finding reasons to visit secluded properties. Gerard would fold the front seats of his car down to create a makeshift bed. So in addition to hooking up on back roads, they used the office for their after-hours sex.
This is really romantic.
Gerard would tell Allison he was going back to finish off some work and he'd go have sex with Tony at the office. So they'd also send seductive emails to each other about what they planned to do when they did meet again. Along with these explicit sexual fantasies, they also exchanged complaints about their spouses. Gerard was adamant that his marriage was over. He told Tony that he did not love Allison and they hadn't slept together for years. For Tony, the affair with Gerard made it impossible for her to stay in her committed relationship. So in November, 3 months after the affair began, she broke up with Robert McKay Wood to pursue a future with Gerard. She moved into a small apartment, but Gerard didn't do the same. Gerard and Tony thought they were being careful about concealing their involvement from co-workers, but actually everybody knew. Gerard's business partner, Jocelyn Frost, sensed that there was something between Gerard and Tony almost as soon as she started at Century 21 in 2008. Allison brought Gerard with her to her psychiatrist in June of 2009, and they had come to talk about the crisis in their marriage. Their relationship had deteriorated, and Allison felt that they really needed some professional help. She wanted to get things back on track, and of course she didn't know anything about the affair. She knew she and Gerard had grown apart, but she thought it was just the stresses of having a young family. At Dr. George's, Gerard revealed his frustrations about their relationship. He said he was tired of making all the decisions, and he was really under enormous pressure at work. Sales were falling off in his real estate business, he said, and he was upset that Allison had bought an expensive treadmill when they were short on money. So the couple told Dr. George that they hadn't had sex for 2 years. Gerard said he felt very isolated, unsupported, and resentful. He said he was thinking of ending the marriage, but he felt guilty about the impact on Allison and their daughters. But he didn't mention his affair with Tony. Allison told Dr. George she didn't want the marriage to end. She really wanted to fight to stay together. She'd come through her depression and believed that they could work out their marriage problems as well. So Dr. George recommended a marriage therapist. And the next month, Allison went to talk to Dr. George about her marriage alone. She was making efforts to spend more time with Gerard, and she'd even planned a trip for them. And that was the last visit she made to that psychiatrist.
In 2010, Gerard was cheating not only on his wife, but on his mistress. He's getting around.
Yes.
He made promises to Tony McHugh telling her he was going to leave his family and marry her. They were going to live together, his kids and her kids, in one big happy family.
Sounds lovely.
Doesn't it? At a real estate conference that same year, 2010, it was around the time of Gerard and Allison's 13th wedding anniversary. At this point, Gerard's business partner told him he needed to stop living a lie. Gerard had said he didn't love his wife and his marriage was over, and Tony confided to Jocelyn Frost that she had plans for a future with Gerard. Jocelyn tried to convince Tony it wasn't going to work that way. Gerard wasn't ever going to leave his wife. But Tony didn't want to hear it. She told Jocelyn that Gerard had promised her that he would marry her.
And I do believe he was making those promises.
Sure, he just wasn't going to follow through.
Right.
So on their 13th wedding anniversary, Gerard told Allison that he didn't love her anymore. He denied there was anyone else, and she believed him. Now, Allison had consulted a new marriage counselor because she was determined to fix things. The counselor's response was not what Allison wanted to hear, however. Most times in this situation, the counselor said the marriage ended. Allison didn't want to hear the marriage couldn't be salvaged. Unhappy with the counselor's take on her marriage, Allison shopped around for different advice, and somehow she ended up in the office of Dr. Laurie Lumsden in December of 2010. Now, she had been a psychologist for 45 years. Now, Gerard went to see Lumsden twice in separate appointments later that month. He told the psychologist he was stuck between whether to stay in his marriage or to leave, but he did not mention his affair with Tony McHugh. By the end of the month, Allison was confident that she could turn things around in her marriage.
Well, she doesn't have all the information to work with, for one thing. So he's not making an honest attempt at anything.
No.
So she's putting everything into saving the marriage. Gerard was creating a new online profile to find more women. He didn't use his real name that he was always bragging about. He used the name Bruce Overland. So this was an alter ego he'd invented for these illicit activities. He entered this profile on Adult Friend Finder, which was a sex dating and swingers website. Looking for discreet sex, he typed. Married, but I don't want to be. Looking for some sex on the side. Bruce Overland was also a name Gerard had been using as an alias in his business life for years. Although he lectured others about ethics, he was secretly using Bruce Overland to keep tabs on his rivals and even bait them online. So he would email other agents as Bruce Overland, saying he was a wealthy miner looking for prestigious property in Brisbane's West, and he would get added to their databases. Once he was on their mailing lists, this made it easy for him to track the new properties they had as they came onto market, and he could keep up to date with their sales techniques, which gave him an advantage against his competition.
Certainly would.
And he was also chasing the opposite sex in the real world. Cheryl Kelly worked with Gerard in his real estate office, and she was really taken aback when he asked her if she'd ever had a threesome. Of course, she wasn't comfortable with the question or with his habit of hugging her whenever the agency sold a property. Century 21 Westside partner Phil Broom would also tell police of being uneasy about the hugs that Gerard dished out to the staff. Broom thought it was just a ploy to cover the hugs that he also gave to Tony. Melissa Romano, a pretty blonde real estate worker, was in touch with Gerard about a property deal on the Gold Coast in 2009, when she spoke to Gerard on the phone a number of times, and he asked her to come and work for him. But when she turned down the offer, the conversation got really bizarre, and he said, "Well, if you're not interested in doing that, I've got another job for you. I'm looking for someone to kill my wife," he said. Now later, after Allison disappeared, Romano went to the police, and she told her story later to 60 Minutes, claiming that Gerard was deadly serious at the time. But detectives concluded that she was an unlikely assassin, and they suspected that Gerard was just trying to pick her up with this weird pickup line.
Yeah, and at another point, Allison had broken her ankle and said she had fallen down some stairs. Now, Allison's cousin was worried that Gerard might be actually hurting Allison. So one of the few people independent of either Allison or Gerard's family to ever witness events inside the Baden-Clay home was their cleaner, whose name was Deb Metcalf. Deb was an office assistant and was cleaning part-time for extra cash. So after registering with an agency, she was sent to Allison and Gerard's Brookfield home in early 2010. Now, Deb liked Allison from the start. She cleaned Allison and Gerard's home every Tuesday for the next 2 years. And during that time, she saw Allison was a loving and busy mom. Allison went out of her way to make Deb feel comfortable. Meanwhile, Gerard is overextending his business. He's spending huge amounts of money and moving into a giant new office building. Besides the fact that this was a huge building, way too big for what they needed.
Yeah.
And the rent was going to be twice as much as they were paying. It wasn't a good idea. And then they had 100-year storms and flooding that year that made things even worse. So the start of the year is usually a busy period for real estate agents, but in this year, no one was thinking about buying or selling on Brisbane's flood-damaged west side. Right when Gerard was really desperate for cash flow, the real estate market ground to a halt. Recovery from this big natural disaster would be very slow.
Well, Nigel and Elaine would have to move out of their house for 9 months while their house was repaired. One Saturday, Century 21 Westside staff went to the house to help them with the cleanup. Gerard and Tony McHugh went off together to get lunch for everyone, but they disappeared for hours, according to one of the workers that was there that day. So they probably had a rendezvous.
They were having an office meeting.
Yeah. Allison found out about Gerard and Tony's affair finally in September 2011. He agreed to end things with Tony, and about 3 weeks after learning of the affair, Allison made an appointment with Dr. Nicholas Bork. She'd previously consulted Bork about her depression, but now, upset, she told the doctor about the turmoil in her marriage. So, the doctor's notes read, "Recent discovery of husband's infidelity. Obviously distressing. Has discussed with him relationship counseling, and both are keen for this." Allison asked Dr. Bork for tests for hepatitis B and C, HIV, syphilis, chlamydia, and gonorrhea. She didn't have any symptoms, but who knew what Gerard had been up to? She was really struggling to cope, she told the doctor, and he upped her Zoloft prescription, doubling the dose. And Allison didn't accept Jared's word that the affair was over. She started keeping tabs on him and monitoring his mobile. She told Jared that she wanted to see all his text messages and to know everyone he was calling. And from then on, she was going to work in the office with him to keep an eye on him. This is so sad to me. If you can't trust someone, what's the point?
I know, because you're always going to figure out how to get around it.
Yeah, that's just no way to have a relationship.
Nope.
But Allison started at Century 21 almost right away, and to reassure her, Jared installed an app called Find My Friends on both of their phones. Now this app would allow her, through GPS tracking, to check his location anytime she wanted. Now when she recovered from the initial shock, Tony was bombarding Jared with phone calls and texts. She told him that he had chosen the wrong woman, and she pleaded with him to get back together with her. Now he ignored her for a while, and eventually she stopped trying and she accepted that it was over, to a certain extent.
So the pressure on Gerard was piling up, not only at work but at home. So the flooding had pretty much destroyed his business. His partners had left. He owed them money. Allison had found out about his affair, and he'd broken up with his lover. Dark days for Gerard. So Gerard had stayed with Allison, despite his earlier promises to Tony. Now, keeping the marriage alive allowed him to live permanently with his daughters and to prevent what was left of his business from being split in two in a divorce settlement. The trade-off was that he'd handed over control in the relationship to Allison, and he still wanted to see Tony. The Gailey Road Five Ways is a little strip of shops that was just down the road from Century 21 West Side. It was close enough for a quick trip without arousing suspicions, but out of the way enough for it to be unlikely he would be spotted. So in a little cafe there, Gerard sat opposite Tony for the first time in 3 months. After ignoring all of her attempts to make contact since he cut her out of his life, he'd had a change of heart and phoned her out of the blue in December 2011. Allison couldn't watch Gerard every hour of the day, and he told Tony he wanted to talk. Over coffee, Gerard declared, "Oh, I'm not leaving Allison," but he said he still loved her. He wanted to say sorry to patch things up. Tony loved him, so this affair, which had been killed off so abruptly in September, was on again. In the months that followed, they would talk frequently, picking times when Allison was busy. Tony would call Gerard several times a week, and they would see each other. Meeting at the coffee shop in February, they discussed their future together. Gerard told Tony he was going to leave Allison and even set a date. Gerard told me he was committed to our relationship and stated that he would be out of his marriage by the 1st of July 2012. Tony would later reveal to police.
Well, Allison would usually leave the office about 2:30 to pick up the girls from school, so that gave Tony and Gerard a few hours for meetings and phone calls before he had to go home. They didn't exchange any texts because Allison demanded to see every message Gerard received. For some time, Gerard had been secretly using an email account under that alias, Bruce Overland. Tony would email Bruce once or twice a day. They'd talk about how much they loved each other and when they could be with each other full time. In an email on February 20th, 2012 to Bruce Overland, Tony wrote about her frustrations. "I'm sick of being second best and having to take the back seat, all so she doesn't find out. Why should I believe things are going to be any different than the past? I shouldn't, and that's the reality." But still, they kept ending up together. The last time the lovers would see each other alone, before everything changed, was in the middle of March. Gerard visited Tony at her apartment. They talked about how hard it was to stay away from each other, and they agreed they wouldn't have sex until they would be together like a normal couple. Allison and Gerard's new marriage counselor had set up an agreement where Allison was allowed to question everything Gerard did for 15 minutes in the evening, and he promised to tell her the truth. Since seeing the counselor, Allison had been interrogating Gerard and planning the questions in advance to ask him. Now, when he took his lover Tony to the movies, she asked, did they travel separately? What did they see? Did they have dinner? Were they scared of being seen? Did they hug and kiss? All these details about the affair, so it's just not a healthy situation. I'm not sure why the counselor would recommend that. It doesn't seem like a good idea.
No.
The only thing I can think of is that Allison was insisting they stay together, when it was probably best if they didn't.
Possibly.
So it had been 7 months since she'd found out about the affair, but there was still so much more that Gerard had to account for. So Allison had another barrage of questions ready that night, Thursday, April 19th. She had an appointment at the hairdresser's, and not long after she left the office for the hairdresser, Gerard was on the phone to Tony. And Tony was going ballistic. He had to tell her that his wife would be at a real estate conference that she was going to as well the next day. So this was a big nightmare for Tony. And what made it more infuriating was that Gerard had left it until the day before to tell her about it. So all these disappointments that he had inflicted on her came flooding back to her. He had done this to her too many times, and both of them had been married with children when it started, and Tony had left her relationship a long time ago to try and have a future with him. But what he did is he just kept giving excuses and promises that went nowhere. But he did always tell her they would be together one day. So she decided that he really needed a push. This conference was going to be a disaster. Allison was going to be upset, and she was already upset. Besides, Tony was always being told that he couldn't afford to leave his wife. So why was he wasting money on these conferences? Tony insisted that Gerard tell Allison that she too would be at that conference the next morning, and she was refusing to back out of the conference. So Gerard was going to have to sort it all out. Now, quite a while had passed since Gerard had told Allison that the marriage was over, and Allison had become a real expert at bottling up her emotions. Even with her closest friends, she was very selective on what she would tell them. I guess she didn't want people to think less of her, or, more likely, try and persuade her into leaving her philandering Gerard. Some of her friends thought that she and Gerard were a great couple because they didn't know about all this. So outwardly, things looked pretty good to most people.
So Allison was propped up on a couch watching the footy show.
I don't know what that is, but it sounds good.
It sounds like some fetish.
It almost sounds like a kid's show. We'll have to look that up.
Her husband told police that this was the last time he'd seen her. It had been a relatively unremarkable night. For others around Brookfield and beyond, the night had sounds that were far from usual. Kim and Julie Svetkoff lived on the corner of Brookfield Road and Boscombe Road opposite the little blue house where Gerard Baden-Clay lived with his family. The two families had never met. Now, on the evening of 19th of April, Julie had been at a guitar lesson and arrived home at about 7. Her husband, Kim, turned up a few minutes later. He was unusually late and would remember glancing at the clock on the wall as he walked in. It had been a long day for both of them. Both were in the kitchen when they heard the same sound, although they would recall it differently. To Julie, it was a sharp, hard yell, lasting just a matter of seconds, and no words were formed. She couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, and put the time between 8 and 9. Kim was closer to the door of their house, and he would remember a startled or shocked yell. And Kim was convinced that it was a woman, and he felt she had been trying to shout something, but had only managed to get a couple of words out. Now, he said it was between 7:30 and 9:30.
That's a broad time span, though.
Yeah, but they weren't paying attention to the clock. I mean, his wife said 8 to 9, so he's adding a little half hour either way.
Right.
So this was an atypical noise for the area, and for a few minutes afterwards, Kim kept an ear out for any further sounds, but there weren't any. One thing the two people agreed about was that the sound had come from opposite their kitchen, which was across the road and around the home of the Baden-Clays.
Yeah, so another neighbor, Ann Rhodes, got into bed at 10 p.m. that night, and minutes before, when she was brushing her teeth, she'd heard a disturbance from outside. There were raised, angry voices, and she couldn't make out what they were saying, or even if they were men or women, or a mix of both. But now she's settling into her book, and she heard another disturbing noise, a woman's scream, high-pitched and loud. So in the silence of her room, she listened for the sound to repeat, but it didn't. But then soon there came another noise, a thud, like a car hitting an embankment. The windows from her bedroom faced out towards Brookfield Road in the direction of the Baden-Clay house, and she'd heard cars crash around that area before. She heard a screech of tires and a car sped off, and she decided there must have been an accident. Now, Stephanie Apps pulled into her driveway around 9:50 p.m., and she could barely wait until the car stopped to open the door and get out of her car away from her arguing teenagers. So once they were all out of the car, it was like all hell broke loose. Her daughter and her son were screaming at each other, and Stephanie lost her patience and shouted at them to cut it out. They ignored her, and in the chaos, her daughter tripped on a ceramic pot, smashing it. The pot was in pieces, and knowing she was in trouble, the 15-year-old ran off towards the driveway and ran into a spider's web. So she was tangled in the web and let out a piercing scream, and this was the startled, high-pitched squeal of a frightened girl. So this may have been what these people were hearing.
Possibly.
Might not have been related to Allison at all.
The time's about right, I guess, although it sounds later from what the first couple said. But anyway.
But you know how people's memories are.
I know. So Bruce Flagg was sitting up in bed, talking on his mobile, when he heard the sound, the scream. Somewhere outside, a woman had screamed. It was a single, unbroken sound that went on for about 3 seconds and then tapered off. Even though he was engaged in his phone conversation, Flagg heard it clearly. It was loud, it was high-pitched, it was disturbing. It was definitely a woman's scream. He leaped out of bed after hearing the scream, walked to the front door, and stepped out into the dark night. It was the first time he'd ever felt compelled to go outside to investigate a noise in the night. So he stood out in the front of his home, straining to hear anything that might explain the chilling sound. He was convinced the scream had come from the front of the property, but with nothing to see, went back inside. His media advisor, Graham Hallett, had only recently moved to Queensland, and he was staying in a back bedroom. Bruce knocked on his door. No response. Graham was fast asleep. Now, while he was standing there, he heard the second scream. It was softer but still blood-curdling, exactly like the first scream. So that would explain maybe the second scream was the kid running into the spider web.
Well, we don't know, yeah.
We don't.
It's definitely possible.
So the hairs on the back of his neck went up again. He grew more uneasy. But there was nothing much he could do. So he decided no point in calling the police because he wouldn't know what to say. In the half hour or so before he drifted off to sleep, there was no noise outside. Well, I don't know if I'd be able to fall back asleep.
Yeah, it always kind of surprises me that people don't call the police when they hear noises.
Yeah.
But around the corner, Susan Braun was tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep, and constantly looking at the clock. She remembered that the clock showed 11:30 p.m. before she fell asleep. And soon after that, a noise woke her with a start, and it was unsettling, maybe a scream or a yell, she would say. A human sound, but impossible to say if it was a man or a woman. So she lay there listening for more noises and eventually fell back to sleep. A second sound like the first woke her again. Susan lay in bed waiting for a third sound to follow and drifted off to sleep again. In the early hours of April 20th, 14 kilometers to the west of Brookfield, Brian and Mary Mason were in bed in their house. Mary, a Qantas flight attendant, was rostered to work on a return flight to Sydney that Friday morning. So she had gone to bed early and had to be at work at 5:15 a.m. Brian, a real estate agent, had a busy day ahead, so he also had an early night. Both were sound asleep when Brian's German shepherd, Sasha, started howling. So at first he stayed in bed, thinking the dog might settle, but the howling continued, and it also woke Mary. Mary said, "I have to get up in a few hours. Will you do something about that dog?" So Brian went out and grabbed Sasha's collar, and he tapped his palm on her snout and sternly told her to be quiet. She was quiet, but in the newfound silence in the house, Brian could hear other dogs howling from the properties around them. Also some mumbling voices. Walking back to his bedroom, no sooner had he closed the door than Sasha started howling again. 10 more minutes of tossing and turning passed before the howling stopped, and they both went back to sleep. So it felt like minutes before the alarm went off and woke Mary for work. Pulling out of her driveway and turning right, her high beams were lighting up the road. And about 500 meters up the road, she saw 2 cars traveling towards her in the direction of Colo Creek Bridge. It was a rarity to pass anyone at this hour, and the 2 cars heading towards her on the opposite side of the road stood out. The car in front was driving fast, and immediately behind it was another car with its headlights off, driving so close that they were not far from touching. And now there was another bizarre thing. So she was concentrating to getting it to work on time, but all these weird things would stick in her mind.
Those are weird.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking if that was when Gerard was disposing of the body, why 2 cars? Did he have an accomplice, or what's going on? Or is this just coincidental?
It might just be coincidental.
Right.
It's never proved to be anything. But it's just interesting to note these things happened.
Yeah. Now, it's 6:20 in the morning. Gerard sent a text message to Allison's phone. "Good morning. Hope you slept well. Where are you? None of the girls are up yet. Love, G." He then went to one of his daughters who was wondering where Mom was. He told her she was out walking. He had shaving cream on his face. He called her over from the bathroom and asked his daughter to help him put Band-Aids on some cuts on his cheek. He called Allison's phone again at 6:45, and there was still no answer. He sent another text saying the girls were ready, and could she text him back or call. One of the dads in the Brookfield suburb was Steve Wommel. He was in the habit of paying close attention to cars and people around the suburb. See, we like people like that. They know everything that's going on.
Right, yep.
Steve was a fly-in, fly-out worker at the Cannington Silver and Lead Mine, 1,300 kilometers northwest of Brisbane. Every second week when he wasn't working, he would drive his son, who was age 14, to the bus that would take him to Brisbane Boys College. So since schoolboy Daniel Morecambe had vanished from a Sunshine Coast bus stop in 2003, Steve had been extra vigilant around his neighborhood. It had only taken a moment for a predator to lure the Morecambe boy into a car, and Steve couldn't bear the thought of that happening to his own son. So he would often make a mental note of the number plates of passing cars. He'd peek into vehicles to see who was driving, and he'd have a good look at anyone walking around. Now, early in the morning, there weren't usually many people out and about. His routine on school days was to drive his son to the bus stop, and generally he would wait in his car until the bus approached, then loop around to the general store on Brookfield Road to grab the newspaper. He would be back in his car in time to see his son wave as he went past in the bus. Well, that's a nice system. Pretty close.
Yeah.
So on Friday, April 20th, Steve looked at his watch as the bus passed with his son inside. It was 7:12 a.m., right on time. With the teen safely off to school, he started to drive home when he saw a friend, Phil Blair, near the showground, and he stopped to say hello. Blair had been at a morning fitness session at the Brookfield State School Oval.
Well, at that time, Olivia Walton was already out on the streets searching. She lived in Townsville, but she'd been visiting her parents, Nigel and Elaine, and it had been a busy morning in the household. Nigel and Elaine's younger son, Adam, had just become a dad to a baby boy in Canada, and he had called them on Skype before 6:30 a.m. to show off the newborn. This video call was still going on when Gerard phoned his parents at 6:45 a.m. Gerard didn't know where Allison was. She'd not returned from a morning walk, he said. So Olivia changed out of her pajamas and drove off to search for her. Driving up Boscombe Road, she saw a groundskeeper on a ride-on mower and stopped to ask if he had seen a woman out walking. He hadn't, so she continued on, turning left onto Brookfield Road. Now, as she did, she glanced over to Gerard's home across the road. Allison sometimes walked to an aged care home about 1 kilometer from the roundabout. Olivia passed that, driving another kilometer, before she turned around and headed back. Seeing 2 women walking on Savage's Road to her right, she stopped to talk to them, but neither of them had seen Allison either. Heading back towards the Brookfield roundabout, Olivia slowed the car, wound her window down, and turned her hazard lights on. Peering into the bushes, she yelled Allison's name. Olivia had run out of minutes on her phone, so she was limited to sending Gerard texts, and then he would call her back once he got a text. She asked him some basic questions about what Allison would have been wearing. Now, he thought Allison would be in a 3/4 length pants and a black or white t-shirt, and she could have had a cap on, he said. At 7:11 a.m., in a call that lasted 2.5 minutes, Gerard asked Olivia if it was too early to call the police, and she said no, not at all. So as Olivia hung up, she spotted 2 men near the showground, and that would be Steve Wommel and his friend Phil Blair. She parked the car and approached them. They hadn't seen a woman out walking, but Blair suggested that she should talk to personal trainer Daniel Crawford, who had led the morning fitness class. So she walked off to speak to him. Olivia didn't name the person she was looking for, because if she had, Steve would have known who she was. His younger son attended Brookfield State School the same year as Allison and Jared's eldest daughter. On the Friday morning when the alarm was raised that Allison was missing, Steve only knew what Olivia had told him, that a woman had gone for a morning walk and hadn't returned. It did strike him as strange. Why would someone be out looking so soon? It was only 7:20 in the morning. So whoever was missing had probably just stopped to chat with a friend or dropped in for a coffee somewhere. It seemed way too early to be worried or in a panic about it.
Well, it does, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're trying to cover your tracks.
Well, I mean, she was supposed to go to that conference at 7 a.m., so it is a little odd.
Yeah, but still.
Yeah.
I mean, she's maybe 15 minutes late.
Half hour, yeah.
Not much.
Right.
So at 8:30 in the morning, Senior Sergeant Narelle Curtis hung up the phone and spoke to the station's shift supervisor, Sergeant Andrew Jackson. There was a situation at Brookfield, and they needed to go there. So 2 officers responding to a call were concerned that a man reporting his wife missing appeared to have scratches on his face. She set off from the Indooroopilly police station, hope I didn't butcher that too badly, with Jackson behind the wheel. As they arrived at the Brookfield Roadhouse, Jackson activated his digital voice recorder. It would capture Gerard talking about the injuries on his face, almost before they'd had a chance to say hello. "Cut myself shaving," Gerard told police. They went inside, where Curtis assured Gerard that the police would do their very best to find his wife. First and foremost, Curtis wanted to know Allison's state of mind. "Pretty good," said Gerard, before adding she had a history of depression that had been managed by medication. "We haven't really discussed it for a long time. She used to be on a daily dose of Zoloft." "So, Gerard, basically you and your wife are estranged, are you?" asked Curtis. No, not at all." "All right, so there's no indication that the marriage is going to break up?" "I hope not," replied Gerard.
It's a little bit of a strange conversation.
"It is, on both parts."
I know, right?
I mean, I'm a police officer. The first thing I'm going to say, are you and your wife estranged?
Yeah, but the way that he said that he didn't know if she was on the medication, he just doesn't seem to know that much about her for her husband. So I can kind of see where she's going with that.
I can too. And just the fact that the first thing he volunteered before anything else was, "Oh, I cut myself shaving."
Well, yeah, that was the big thing, I think. But after searching the streets, Olivia had taken her nieces to school and returned to find Gerard speaking to the police officers. He asked her to leave while he discussed some private issues with them, and she promised to be right outside if he needed her. So with his sister out of earshot, Gerard broached his cheating for the second time with police that morning. He said that he had an affair that ended a year ago, and it had put a strain on the relationship. But he said that he and Allison had been working through it. Now, one weird thing is that he obviously paid more attention to his wife's wardrobe than most husbands would, because he was able to deduce what she had been wearing by noticing what was missing from her drawers.
I could never do that.
No. So there were 2 main routes that Allison walked. One involved a journey to the Brookfield Village aged care home on Gold Creek Road. Olivia had already driven along there twice looking for Allison, he told them. Now the second route involved doing a loop around the school to Brookfield Produce and back to their house. But neither of these routes were longer than 2 kilometers round trip, and there was no sign of her. Now Curtis did broach the topic of those painful-looking scratches on Gerard's face. She said, "Gerard, I have to ask this question. Those 2 marks on your face could be consistent with having been scratched." "I was asked that this morning," he said. "I cut myself shaving." So he's sticking to that story.
Well, he's already said it. He's got to stick with it.
That's true. So ordinarily on a Friday, he would meet with his sales team at 8:30 and go through the properties listed for the weekend. But the plan was different that day because Allison and his property manager, Kate Rankin, were going to the seminar or conference. So Gerard needed to look after the kids and do the school run, so that's why he said he was up just after 6 a.m.
And to justify why he had contacted the police so early, he said his wife was usually gone no longer than 20 to 40 minutes. "But this morning is concerning me, and why I called you was because she had this seminar she's going to today with Kate, and she's been excited about it. I knew she wanted to leave here at about 7. So if you take that into account, yeah, she's not back.
Right.
I'd press the panic button. His sister Olivia was down from Townsville, with her 3 children, and everyone is going to come over to the Brookfield Road home on Friday night for a sleepover. It's completely out of character, although there have been occasions when she's pissed off with me and she hasn't responded to a text message or a phone call. Gerard said he'd sent 2 text messages to Allison and tried to call her. So Curtis tried phoning Allison's number and left a message asking her to call the police station. There was something else, Gerard added. As a result of his infidelity and his wife's subsequent mistrust of him, the couple had put the Find My Friends tracking app on their phones. I didn't mention this to you before, but yeah, we have an application on our phones, which really she sort of insisted upon, where you can look up and see where the other person is, based on GPS. So she can check up on me. Now, both officers instantly asked to use the app. Gerard said he had already tried, but Allison's location had not come up. Location services on the phone would need to be turned on for the app to work.
So Senior Sergeant Curtis wanted to know more about how Allison had learned about Gerard's affair. Gerard said he believed she found out from a friend at school after his former business partners had blabbed. Perhaps sensing where things were heading, Gerard tried to play down these marriage problems. "We have a generally pretty positive outlook on these sorts of things," he said. So according to Gerard, there was a difficult discussion of 15 minutes the previous night as a result of his affair. Then they had returned to more mundane topics as he'd gone to bed. Now, noticing a red mark on the inside of Gerard's hand, the police person asked what had caused the injury, and Gerard had said he repainted and recarpeted a friend's house and was using a ratchet screwdriver to replace a bathroom light fitting the day before, on Thursday, when he cut himself. So detectives were coming and going all day. A constable announced that there had been a breakthrough. Allison's phone had been traced. The phone was just out back of the house somewhere, and a search party was being formed to look for it. Now, the odd thing about this was Gerard barely reacted. If he believed that his wife was about to walk through the back door with her phone or be found in the back somewhere, he didn't seem relieved about it or worried about it. He just said okay. The detectives wanted to know if there would be any reason for Allison to be in any of the properties out behind the house, and Gerard said no, it was just residential property. He added that a neighbor had previously complained when some free-range chickens of theirs were eating their garden beds. So these people weren't very close to their house.
No. And then, looking at the scratches on Gerard's cheek, this same constable asked if Allison was right-handed or left-handed. Gerard replied right-handed. So the constables didn't think the cuts looked like injuries from a razor. They were fresh and weeping. One was around 3 centimeters long and the other about 2 centimeters long. They were wide, not straight, a little jagged. So just the fact that they were wide, I mean, that's tough to pin on a razor.
Oh, and you can see them. They don't look at all like a razor. No.
So I'm going to ask directly about the shaving, the constable said. Gerard said circumstances had been dire. He was talking about his finances, and he hadn't bought new razors for about 6 months, and he was in a hurry.
So the house had normal clutter of a young family, but it did have a smell of cleaning solution, and all of the beds were neatly made, which was a little strange. Gerard was also dressed for work, complete with a tie and cufflinks. Police saw Gerard's father Nigel at the house, and oddly he was carrying the family's vacuum cleaner out to his car. So police needed to get a formal signed statement from Gerard about Allison's disappearance. They also wanted to photograph and document his injuries. He was asked to go to the police station to do both, and he agreed. Gerard allowed them to photograph him, but had spoken to a lawyer and would not provide a statement, so his complete cooperation was over. He was within his rights to decline to give the statement, but to police this was a big red flag. Gerard said he was following the instructions of his lawyer, so silence is generally the golden rule of defense attorneys, but it was up to Gerard whether he chose to follow that advice. By not doing whatever the police asked of him, they would find it more difficult to rule him out as a suspect, of course.
Yeah, but he's just following our directions, right?
I know, but when your wife goes missing, does it change a little?
I'm still lawyering up.
But don't you think maybe you care more about your wife than whether you're going to go to prison and you want to cooperate?
I think we can figure out a medium ground for that.
Okay, so you're not going to knock him for that?
No.
Okay, good enough.
So Gerard's shaving story just didn't ring true.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But his wife could have run off after an argument, and he was embarrassed. Checking for any criminal history, detectives found Gerard was clean. No arrests, no complaints to police of domestic violence. The worst trouble Gerard had been in was for driving more than 30 kilometers an hour over the speed limit when he was a 17-year-old. He had a more recent traffic infringement for disobeying a no left turn sign, and a few others for speeding. Sergeant Greg Matthews, one of the search and rescue management coordinators, set up the police command post. Matthews knew Gerard had called in a lawyer and was refusing to provide a formal statement, and was surprised to see him. Matthews told Gerard he'd need some information to help with the search, and he asked Gerard to go back through events again. So Gerard repeated what he told the police earlier. Allison had told him the night before of her plans to leave home by 7 in the morning for the conference. He told Matthews about his wife's usual walking routes, and said his sister and father had driven to his house on the Friday morning when Allison hadn't returned. Matthews asked more questions about whether there had been any issues between them on the Thursday night, and whether Allison would harm herself. Gerard replied by asking him to keep his voice down. So even now, with his wife missing and his home a crime scene, Gerard's worrying about his reputation and how things are going to appear.
Sure. That's the kind of guy he is, though. Let's be real.
That's right.
Yeah.
Gerard had a morning medical appointment to get to with his GP, and he never returned to the search base after that.
Which was looked upon badly.
Well, sure.
Made him look bad.
Yeah, but he's just following instructions.
Right. But like we said, the search had begun right away because police believed that she was in danger. There were firefighters, friends, family, and volunteers participating in this giant search. The clubhouse at Brookfield became the command post for the search, and the girls stayed with Gerard's parents. Gerard told Allison's family about his affair, but he said it had been over for months. He said it had nothing to do with her leaving. They had not fought, and he didn't know why she would have left. But of course Allison's family and friends are really worried. They knew she had suffered from depression and that the marriage was troubled. Plus he's got those damn scratches on his face. And they just didn't believe that Allison would ever leave her kids. So during door-to-door canvassing of the neighborhood, police learned that several people had heard some screams in the night before Allison was reported missing. Gerard stayed at his parents' house with his daughters, and he and his family were shielding the children from the media. But there was talk right away about Gerard not bothering to help with the search, and that he was really not showing much emotion. So when Gerard called Tony on Friday, he told her that Allison was missing. She thought he might have finally told Allison he was leaving her for good, and that Allison had just taken off upset. Gerard told Tony that he was being suspected by the police, and that the both of them should keep quiet about the relationship. Police were still trying to find Allison's phone by triangulation and by the Find My Friends app. And Gerard was maintaining that he had nothing to hide. So he was called back to the police station to have his injuries photographed, and he was asked to remove his shirt. He was examined by a forensic officer. There were marks also on his upper torso with fine red scratches and some petechial hemorrhaging, which is those little tiny pinpoint blood-burst vessels. There was another scratch between his underarm and his shoulder as well, and a bruise in the center of his chest. And he told police that he'd had an allergic reaction to a caterpillar bite and had forgotten to mention it. Now, when they looked into that later, there's no caterpillar in that area that could cause that type of injury.
There's no vampire caterpillars?
Or reaction, no.
Okay. It's kind of a stretch, but he had to think quickly.
Yeah.
So that's the best he could come up with.
It wasn't very good.
It was the caterpillar.
Yeah.
2 days later, after Allison was reported missing, a blood smear stain was found in her car. This was a contact smear with drips down to the floor of the vehicle in the third row seat area, and there was a strand of blonde hair found with it. So the police called in a medical examiner to do further inspection of the marks on Gerard's chest. But it turned out he had been in a minor accident that day on his way to the station. He was taken to the hospital. Gerard had driven up an embankment and hit a concrete pylon. He crawled from the car wreck, using his arms and hands to drag himself along the ground as though his legs were paralyzed. So a 17-year-old kid ran over to help him, he had witnessed the crash, and Gerard said to him, I need my lawyer. He kept repeating the phrase until another onlooker asked why he felt he needed one. So paramedic Louise Winter, who arrived at the scene a short time later, asked Gerard if he had any pain, to which he said, "All over my body. I need to speak to my lawyer. Where's Darren?" And then his lawyer, Darren Mahoney, soon arrived at the scene.
Well, Allison's parents, Priscilla and Jeff, made a public appeal to help find her as this search was continuing. Some of Allison's friends told police about the emotional abuse Allison had suffered from Gerard, and they believed he was capable of physical violence as well, so they were actually concerned that he had killed her and hidden her body somewhere. Police set up a mannequin wearing what Gerard had described Allison was likely wearing when she disappeared, and police felt pretty sure that Gerard had not given them the full story about the affair with Tony, or that he had been honest about how he got those injuries. Now, they knew, of course, that he had called Tony on Friday, the day that Allison was reported missing. They also knew that he had called her Sunday from a payphone. During the second call, Gerard told Tony that the police knew about their relationship and they should be calling her to talk to her. He also told her that the police believed Allison might have met with foul play, and he wanted to know if she had told police that they were still involved. But Tony was talking to the police by Sunday, 2 days after Allison had been reported missing. Gerard had actually interrupted her interview with police, but Gerard had been telling police that their affair had been over for 7 months since Allison had found out about it. But Tony was telling them the truth. The affair had continued, and Gerard had promised that he loved her and would leave Allison by July 1st, which was Allison's birthday. Police and the media were beginning to notice a division between Gerard's family and Allison's family, and Gerard was completely avoiding the media. So there were two sides to the case: the very public search for Allison that her family was very involved in, and the homicide investigation that was happening behind the scenes. Investigators felt very strongly that Allison had been killed, and probably by her husband. The search was one of the largest in history, with a really big public interest. But it was strange that Gerard was hardly ever seen and not involved in the search at all. The media reported very factually and controlled comments and opinions on the case because Australia, I guess, has some really strict defamation laws.
So you better make sure you can back up what you print, right?
Right, so you can't just be saying willy-nilly stuff. But online, the opinions and criticisms of Gerard and the Baden-Clay family were everywhere. People were talking about his affair and his financial problems, and suspicions were growing very quickly.
Then on April 30th, in the early morning, which was the 11th day after Allison's disappearance, Darrell Joyce, a professor of horticulture, was kayaking on the Brisbane River. Colo Creek ran into the river, and when he approached the Colo Bridge, he saw clothing on the muddy bank. So it looked like clothing on a mannequin that had been set up for Allison's search, but the clothing was covered with leaves and debris. He was unable to turn back and look closer, but he felt pretty sure of what he was seeing, so he went home and he called the police. So the police arrive, they get to the body, close the road off, bring in the forensics team. It's Allison. She's fully clothed, still wearing shoes. Her hair was matted and muddy. She still wore her engagement ring and her wedding band. So they had to winch 2 officers down to bring up her body. And the decomposition was consistent with someone being dead for 11 days. And she was taken to the morgue for autopsy. The Baden-Clay's home was 14 kilometers away from the site where her body was found. Search teams still continued to look for her phone. Now, Allison's family was at the search command post when they were notified. Police and community members cried along with them. Gerard's parents came out of their house and they lowered their Australian flag to half-mast. Gerard said in a public statement that was released by his lawyer, because he's still not talking to anybody, that he was devastated by the loss of his wife and his primary concern was the care of his 3 daughters.
So that all sounds appropriate.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, the autopsy stated that both the neckband and waistband to Allison's top were up around her neck, so it couldn't be ruled out if they were used as a ligature to strangle her. No other findings to account for her death were found. There was no evidence of sexual assault. She did have a bruise on her inner left chest wall, but it couldn't be linked to any disease or fracture. Some granular matter was found behind one eye, which could be a sign of blunt force trauma. But the state of decomposition made it impossible to tell for certain. Her body had been found directly beneath the bridge, and she had no fractures from a fall. But her cause of death was undetermined. Detectives Chris Kanief and Cameron McLeod went to the Century 21 Westside offices to tell Gerard that a woman's body had been discovered. But Gerard told them he had already found out online. His father Nigel was with him at the office and volunteered to formally identify her body. But Allison was not in a state to be identified by sight, so the detectives said that would not be necessary. The 3 little girls were the only living link Priscilla had to her daughter, and she felt a really powerful need to see them at that point. She wanted to connect with them and to console them. Jeff said he couldn't call Gerard, not even to ask for the girls. He just couldn't stomach it. So Priscilla decided to ask herself. She phoned Gerard, and she said, "Can I just come around and see the girls?" But Gerard said no. He hadn't told the girls anything yet, and he was going to wait until there was actual confirmation from the police that it was Allison. And Priscilla was willing to do things his way. She agreed not to tell them anything. She just wanted to see them and give them hugs. But Gerard still wouldn't allow it. He said it wasn't appropriate, and they should talk about it the next day. Now there was media everywhere, and he didn't want to add to the craziness, he said. But Priscilla, who of course is heartbroken and devastated, this is her daughter, actually begged him, but he hung up the phone on her, according to her. So Gerard was holding his 3 daughters' hands as they placed posies on her coffin on May 11th at her funeral. The media continued to camp outside of his parents' house where Gerard and the girls were staying. The director of Queensland Herbarium, Dr. Gordon Geimer, volunteered to personally handle identifying the plant samples found on Allison's clothing and hair. He could identify some of the plant species as soon as he saw them, and for those he was unsure of, he had an enormous reference library. So he studied the leaf material to determine her final movements. There were 6 species of leaves found in her hair. Of the 6 species, he could only find evidence of 2 in the foliage of the creek and scrub leading up to the road where her body was found. He examined the family home garden for the species and was able to identify all 6 species of leaves in the area around the back patio. So this meant that there was a high probability that Allison had been in the foliage of her own garden before arriving at the creek bed. To be sure, the doctor walked the 14 kilometers from the house to the creek along the winding roads and foliage. The only location where all 6 species were located was at the house. So this meant that there had been an altercation at the Baden-Clay house.
Yeah, this guy, Dr. Geimer, really went above and beyond for his work with the police. I mean, it's just amazing detective work to identify all these plants.
Impressive, so detailed.
So detectives are getting ready to arrest Gerard, and the plan was to go up to his office and ask him to accompany them to the police station, where he would be arrested and charged with murder. So police wanted the arrest to go down with as little complication as possible, and in particular, police wanted to make sure there was no confrontation in front of his children, because he was expected to pick up his daughters from school. But some of Gerard's colleagues had seen him coming down to the parking lot and get into his car. So when they found this out, 3 detectives ran to Gerard's car. They opened the driver's side door and pulled him from the car. Gerard threw his arms in the air and offered no resistance. And he immediately started making excuses. "Got to pick up my children. I got to call my parents."
Well, yeah. I think he was kind of shocked.
I think he wasn't expecting this, right?
Right. At least not at that moment.
So as he was taken away, he looked angry more than anything else. He was glaring at the officers. He asked for his attorney and wouldn't talk to the detectives. Magistrates do not have the power to grant bail on murder charges, so Gerard's legal team would wait for a date in the Supreme Court to make an application for bail. Police, who wanted to shave the beard he'd been growing since Allison disappeared, applied for a forensic procedure order to do it. And this was swiftly granted. So this allowed police to see what was under the beard. Forensic medical officer Dr. Leslie Griffiths, who had examined Gerard in hospital after his car accident almost 2 months earlier, was called to carry out the order. Shaving Gerard's right cheek, he found His injuries were fading but still visible, and had scarred. Now, superficial shaving cuts would not be expected to make scarring.
Right. Well, because of his high profile, he was kept under observation in the jail's medical center. Gerard's family was already working to get him out on bail. Dr. Bruce Flegg was a wealthy man, but even for him the request seemed extraordinary. Not long after Gerard was arrested, Flegg answered a phone call, and it was Gerard's sister Olivia. She asked would Flegg come up with $1 million for Gerard's bail. So this took him by surprise, and he thought that she was really out of touch with reality, and he told her no way right off the bat. In the Electronic Evidence Examination Unit, investigative computer analyst Neil Robertson was re-examining data retrieved from Gerard's iPhone. When Allison had first gone missing, Robertson had used a forensic tool called the Celebrite Universal Forensic Extraction Device to download data from Gerard's seized phone. He used a separate application called Celebrite Physical Analyzer to make the data readable. At 8:30 a.m. on the day of the hearing, Robertson used the application to review the data from Gerard's phone, hoping to pick up something he had missed before. And he actually did. It showed Gerard had made a previously unknown FaceTime call to his father Nigel, not long after midnight on the night Allison went missing. So FaceTime calls are made over the internet and don't appear on standard call records. But it would turn out that this was an error of the application, because actually Nigel didn't even own an iPhone or any Apple products. So that was just all a red herring. Now that afternoon, police conducted a raid on the home of Nigel and Elaine Baden-Clay, and that's when they found out. There's no iPhone, no iPad, nothing there. Gerard's new bail hearing started at 10 a.m. on Friday the 22nd of June, and the new hearing began with his barrister, Peter Davis, seeking to show the case as weak. Davis said there was no known cause of death, no time or even date of death, no real evidence of the place of death, no sightings of Gerard at the bridge where Allison was found, and no sightings of him outside the family home at all. But the judge said the case was far from weak. Whilst it is circumstantial, there are a number of factors which, if accepted by the jury, would represent a strong case, he said. And the judge went on to outline the key points of the Crown case: the scratches on Gerard's face, the iPhone being plugged into a charger at 1:48 a.m., Allison's blood in the car, Gerard's affair with Tony, his promises to leave his wife by July 1st, the financial pressures, also his haste to claim his wife's life insurance policy of almost $1 million.
Yeah, right. Basically the same day she was identified.
Yes.
He applied.
Yep, he did.
He wasn't wasting time.
That was not a good sign.
No.
Then there was the looming clash between Allison and Tony at the real estate conference the next day. The murder charge and the mandatory life sentence were powerful incentives for Gerard to flee also. So he would stay in prison. There would be no bail.
Yeah, the motives for Allison's murder were argued strongly by the defense in Gerard's trial. They argued that his affair supported the theory that Allison had committed suicide. I'm not sure how, but anyway. The prosecution had submitted that Gerard had debts in excess of $1 million, but a financial analysis by the police that included his investments showed that he is actually just over $60,000 in debt, so a little bit different. Still, he was denied bail. For one thing, Allison had never talked with anyone about having suicidal thoughts, and also, her counselors all denied she was suicidal. And regardless of his actual debt, he had tried to cash in on her life insurance on the day her body was found.
Which was a bad choice.
Bad move.
So his trial began in June of 2014, and Gerard pled not guilty. During the trial, extracts from Allison's diary were read aloud to the jury. Her writings showed that she was in a troubled marriage and she was unhappy. On the outside, they appeared like an ideal family. An email from April 3rd from Gerard to Tony was presented as evidence, and in this email, Gerard wrote, "I have given you a commitment and I intend to stick to it. I will be separated by July 1st. Gerard denied ever intending to leave Allison for Tony. He did admit to sleeping with other women while cheating on Allison with Tony. He underwent lengthy cross-examination, but he never lost his temper on the stand. Tony testified about her lengthy affair with Gerard. She said that the last time they saw each other before Allison disappeared, Gerard told her he would leave Allison by July 1st. She said that they often talked about a future together and he told her that he no longer loved Allison. She also said that they had an argument on the evening before Allison was reported missing. Tony was upset about going to the same conference as Allison, and she wanted him to make a choice between her and Allison. 3 forensics experts testified that the scratches on Gerard's face were consistent with fingernail scratches. The jury heard the police interview where he told police he had cut himself shaving. Experts said the cuts were too wide and irregular to have been caused by shaving.
So following a month-long trial and 5 days of jury deliberations, the jurors found a guilty verdict in the murder of Allison. Gerard was sentenced to a minimum term of 15 years. Now, Allison's family expressed relief to the media that he would be in prison. But then, in December of 2015, after appealing because his defense never presented the possibility that he may have killed Allison accidentally in the heat of an argument, his murder conviction was downgraded to manslaughter. This is pretty crazy shit.
Yeah.
They're trying to change things around his defense. I mean, he never admitted to killing Allison in an argument, and now they're saying, well, he could have?
Right. And he never even at that point said that he did. He just wanted to use that to downgrade his conviction. So this downgrading was widely criticized, especially by domestic violence activists. They believed that Allison's case could bring attention to the widespread problem of domestic abuse, and since her death, funding to the prevention of domestic violence had increased. So we don't want people thinking they can murder and get away with this manslaughter conviction.
Right.
We don't want that happening.
So they established the Allison's Gift Foundation. The organization assists young victims of crime by providing financial assistance and support. Yellow is significant of the foundation because it was Allison's favorite color. So there's one positive thing from this tragedy, and that's the attention that it has brought to other women suffering from domestic violence. In response to the downgrading of Gerard's murder charge, the Director of Public Prosecutions appealed the decision, and a petition was started calling on the Queensland Attorney General to uphold the original conviction. It had over 120,000 signatures, and rallies were held. This was a huge deal.
Very big deal over there, yeah.
So the High Court of Australia, which is the Supreme Court of that country, heard the appeal. Gerard had never claimed he accidentally killed Allison at his trial, and the court decided in August 2016 to reinstate his murder conviction. He was sentenced to life and to serve a minimum term of 15 years. We've talked about this before.
Still far more lenient than what he would have gotten in the U.S.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's still more than he would have gotten for manslaughter.
Oh, sure. Yes, I'm definitely happy that it was reinstated, for sure. Well, significant to me, as mentioned in the epilogue by David Murray, the author of The Murder of Allison Baden-Clay, All Marriages Have Their Secrets, is that when Gerard had his strange car accident 2 days after he reported Allison missing, he may have actually come close to confessing. A 17-year-old was eating McDonald's and waiting for a bus when Gerard's car drove straight into a concrete pylon in front of him. So the car had been going about 50 kilometers an hour and didn't brake at all. Smoke billowed from the vehicle and the airbags had deployed. And Gerard emerged from the wreck using only his arms to drag his body across the ground. Like you said, acting like his legs weren't working. And he kept repeating that same thing, "I need my lawyer," over and over. Gerard said he was meeting his lawyer at the police station. A nurse arrived and then paramedics and firefighters, and Gerard was crying. Paramedics found him lying face down, crying his eyes out, and he told them he must have looked down at his phone, and that's why he hit the pylon. But Gerard was sobbing and saying he was sorry at one point, and one of the paramedics asked him, "Are you sorry about the accident or something else?" So quite telling, Gerard answered, "There's something else." So do you think at that point maybe he was going to confess? Maybe he was feeling guilty?
I don't know. I mean, I suspect that he might have been trying to harm himself by driving the car into the pylon.
Well, yeah, I thought he was doing that so he could make some of the scratches look like they came from the accident.
Well, that's too far apart.
Because he was supposed to go for that medical exam.
Yeah, that wasn't going to work.
No, but I think he might have been attempting that. I'm not saying it would have worked. Might have been part of his thoughts.
I think maybe he was ready to confess, but he didn't.
He wasn't totally ready because he was asking for his lawyer.
Right.
So there was some kind of dynamic inside of him going either way, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Allison's family and her friend Carrie Ann spoke to the media about Allison's legacy of her 3 daughters, who would be raised by Allison's parents. In early 2017, it was ruled that Gerard would not receive any of Allison's life insurance, of course, and it was transferred into a trust fund for the girls. So a big thank you to David Murray. He's a local journalist who wrote the book, The Murder of Allison Baden-Clay. Also a big thank you to the Australian Online, because without the research from these 2 sources, this podcast wouldn't have been possible. Before listener feedback, a big thank you also to our listeners, our Tie Grabber members, our Patreon supporters, and everyone who's taken the time to write to us or leave us voicemails. If you have feedback or a crime you'd like to suggest, why not leave us a voicemail? You can click on Leave Us a Voicemail on our website, tiegrabber.com, or you can record your own feedback on your phone or on your computer and email it to us at truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. So why listen to us read your feedback when we can hear it straight from you? That's the way I look at it. Now, if listening to True Crime Brewery is a positive little part of your life and you'd enjoy an extra episode to listen to once in a while, you can offer your support by joining Team Tie Grabber at tiegrabber.com or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/True Crime Brewery. As a member, you'll get access to about 20 members-only TCB episodes and all the new ones that we release each month. When you join, we'll send a bottle opener or a snifter, and I also will throw in some more pieces of swag like stickers, magnets, and coasters. Now, after you sign up, you should get an email, and if you don't see it right away, make sure to check your junk mail. Some other ways to offer us some support are to follow us on Twitter at TieGrabberPods, on Instagram or on Facebook. Also, if you have a few extra minutes to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, that helps out a lot. So the first thing I have for feedback is a voicemail from Kate.
Hi, Jill and Dick. It's Kate from Rochester, New York, leaving you a message. It's a Wonderful Life. The town is Bedford Falls, and it was actually based on Seneca Falls in upstate New York. They actually have an It's a Wonderful Life museum there, which I have not yet visited, but hope to someday. I also want to second the listener who recommended the Syed girls' murder, the honor killing case. That would be a really good one. Also, I want to second the person who suggested Luca Magnotta, who was really quite a disturbed individual. I believe the cook who won the beer description contest suggested that case from Canada, and I hope maybe you guys will look into that as well. So love the show and look forward to listening every week. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Kate. So what do you think of those suggestions? I know we spoke about Luca before and we kind of put it off.
Right, and when we talked about the honor killings, the Saeed girls, we thought that'd be a worthy episode, didn't we?
Yeah, I don't know if it's worth a whole episode, if we should just do an episode on honor killings and maybe address a few of them.
That'd be good. Think about that.
Yeah.
And Magnotta, I remember being so grossed out when I was researching it that I said, I don't want to do it.
Yeah. That happens sometimes, but then sometimes we revisit them and decide to do them, so. It
might be worth a revisit.
Yeah. Well, just a quick review. Luca Magnotta was a Canadian murderer who was convicted of killing and dismembering Lin Jun, a Chinese international student, before he mailed Jun's hands and feet to elementary schools and a federal political party office. So this act gained international notoriety, which I could see why it would, and after a video depicting the murder was posted online in May 2012, he fled Canada and became the subject of an Interpol Red Notice. In June 2012, he was apprehended at an internet cafe in Berlin while reading news about himself. And then in December 2014, a jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Now, I think one thing that really sickened us was that he had previously got some notoriety from animal rights groups. He had uploaded some videos of himself killing kittens, which was very disturbing.
That it was.
Yeah. And it was our beer review winner who recommended this case.
Yeah. All right. Let's look at it some more.
So we'll think about that. That's possible.
And I guess I was 0 for 2 in the Wonderful Life reference.
Yeah, we didn't quite nail that, but
No.
so thanks for that, Kate.
We weren't even quite close, were we?
No, but I knew a listener would come through for us.
And she did.
Yes, she did.
Thank you. So I have a comment from Scott R. on the trooper's target. Great job on this case, Jill and Dick. I'm just a little perplexed at why Dick has such a hard time believing that the police could be biased or protect one of their own. In this case, the truth definitely went out, but I definitely think Kevin Foley's arrest was delayed because he was a state trooper. And also, I hate that Michelle got away with inciting all this misery and violence. I hope that someday her children will realize how horrible she is and cut her out of John's hard-earned money.
I can go along with that. I do think, Dick, that you have a thing about that. You're always defending the police.
Well, I just have a tough time looking at this as this huge conspiracy to
Not
protect
a huge
one another.
conspiracy, but a group of people might conspire to protect someone. Sure, it happens.
Well, in this case, it would be a huge conspiracy.
Why?
Because if they think that he did it, it would take a lot of higher-up people to suppress it.
Well, I don't know about that, suppressing it. I think they just kind of focused on someone else instead of focusing on him. Like if he had been some common drug addict in the neighborhood or someone they didn't respect, they would have gone after him a lot quicker. But since he was a trooper, they gave him a lot of benefit of the doubt, I feel.
Well, maybe.
You just have a problem with it, and that's okay.
I don't see...
We all have our issues. That's one of yours.
Okay. It's my issue.
I understand you want to defend the police because I think police do get judged badly sometimes. But in some cases, police are bad. They're people.
Okay.
Okay, I have a letter from Jenny M., and it has some compliments and a case suggestion. And I did edit it for time. It was a long one. So Jenny says, I love your podcast. I have binged all the episodes, and I eagerly wait for the new ones to drop. I love the research you do and the backstory of the individuals involved. The objectivity that you and Dick bring to the podcast is unique and refreshing. I'm not a big fan of beer, but listening to all the beer reviews and hearing that there are flavors of coffee and chocolate really enticed me to try some stouts, and I found one that I absolutely love. Normally, I would not have even looked twice at it, but after listening to so many reviews of stouts, I had to give it a try. It is called Vanilla Otis, made by Ninkasi Brewing Company in Eugene, Oregon. It's an oatmeal stout and very, very delicious. I would love to hear Dick's review of this beer, so I found an Oregon case that I would find very fascinating. And unfortunately, it is also terribly disturbing. It is the murder of Janie Landers that went unsolved for 38 years. She was an 18-year-old who was living in a state-run facility for people who are developmentally delayed. This was a cold case that was just recently solved due to the persistence of Janie's family and a state police detective who reopened the cold case and was able to think outside the box and find DNA that led to her killer. The only other suggestion I have is not for a case, but for your website. I was wondering if the case name or episode number could be referenced with the name of the beer on Dick's Beer Cellar page. There are so many, it's hard to remember what his review was for each one, and I would like to hear the review again if I knew which episode it was from. Keep up the great work. I'm a loyal listener, and tell everyone I know who's interested in true crime about your podcast. Thank you so much for all you do and the time that you put into each episode. Thanks, Jenny.
It's a nice note.
Yeah, so what have you got to say, Dick?
Well, I would tell Jenny that I've had, I know at least one Ninkasi beer that I've had. It was a collaboration with Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada does a collaborative 12-pack every year or so. And this is one of them. I remember I enjoyed that beer a lot. I don't think I've had any just brewed by Ninkasi themselves.
So you might need to.
So I might need to, because I'm always interested in cold cases and outside-the-box thinking. So we might have to look into that.
Okay. What about the website suggestion?
Yeah, I think the quick answer is there should be some way to be able to identify which episode the beer appears in.
Yeah.
But then I'm thinking it's going to take up a lot of space.
Maybe we could put the date next to it. That might take too much space. The date that the episode was released.
That might work. Because otherwise, I mean, sometimes we don't even have the name of the episode when I've picked the beer. We know
True.
What it's from. So we can't put such and such an episode with this beer because we don't always know what it is.
Well, yeah, and plus some of the episode titles are long.
Right.
And we don't really number our episodes.
And we don't number them.
No, we just date them. So maybe the date would work.
I think a date would work. I'll look into doing that.
It would be a project. It would take you a while. And a lot of beers.
Well, I'm good for it.
Okay.
I can do that.
All right. You want to read the letter from Patricia? It says she's a Jeff McD stalker.
Is that Jeffrey McDonald?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so this is from Patricia, who says, "Need I say again, I'm such a fan of you guys. Your delivery is unique, smart, fun, and entertaining."
Edutaining.
Edutaining.
Which means educational.
And entertaining. Okay. I heard you read my J. MacD recommendation a few months back and sensed hesitation on Jill's part. What can I say to persuade you that this is worthy of you? I usually like current stuff, but I think this is still intriguing and a curious case. Hugs and gratitude. P.S. Where can I find these great brewskis? Dick makes them sound so delectable, but here I am in northern Santa Barbara and am clueless re relatively obscure microbreweries.
All right, well, first I'll talk about Jeffrey McDonald. I was hesitant just because it was so well known. I'm not as hesitant now to do well-known cases. For a while I was, because I felt like, gosh, I don't want to rehash something that's been done by everybody. But, we do have a different way of covering things. So I have been more open to doing more well-known cases. And we do have the book. Is it Fatal Vision?
I think that's it.
So I think we will do it. I was just putting up the schedule for September. So I think I'll put it in September's schedule.
There's still stuff going on about it.
Right.
So it'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to where you can find these great brews, probably a good spot would just be Beer Advocate or Rate Beer. Just go to those sites and you can look up regions and stuff and find out what breweries. And you say, I'm in Santa Barbara, California, and they will tell you stores, breweries, what's available.
Okay. Good idea.
It's easy.
Yeah. All right.
All right, team. This looks like we're done.
Well, we did get one voicemail last week and one voicemail this week.
Okay.
So 1 a week is pretty good. At least we get one to play with each episode. But I would like to see more.
We want 2 next week.
That would be my goal, if I could get 2 next week to play.
There's your charge, listeners.
Yeah, I would really love that. And the way to do that, of course, is to go to our website, tygrabber.com, and click on Leave a Voicemail. Or you can record it any way you want in an audio file and send it to us. Maybe we need to come up with a phone line people can leave messages at. We should think about that. But first, let's try and get some more people doing it.
Let's do that first.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And we will see you next time at the Quiet End.
We'll save a seat for you. And if we don't save a seat, you can be up on stage doing karaoke or tossing darts or whatever.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's go see if that guy is Wayne Newton before we go.
We should.
All right. We'll let you know. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.